never combine too many drugs. A datura, DXM, hydrocodone, methylphenidate, nutmeg, alcohol and cannabis trip report by Datura Goddess. Post to earwid.org, November 16th, 2000. On the night of the 27th of October, 2000, I was desperate to get high because I'd been sober for 2 months. My friend L was blabbing about combining drugs, and he ended up betting me 1/4 ounce of marijuana that I wouldn't do all of these drugs at once. I agreed on the bet, and we gathered up the drugs. I paid for the bud, DXM, alcohol, nutmeg, while he got the datura, Vicodin and Ritalin. And in case you're wondering, before this experience I had smoked weed, tripped off of DXM only once using 8 pills, while also tripping off of datura, called moonflower where I live. I'd taken it twice, both times eating all the seeds in one pod, and gotten drunk before. I'd never tried Vicodin, Ritalin or nutmeg before this though. There were 3 people involved, including me. I will call my 2 friends L and M. To prepare for this experience, we got all of the drugs I was going to take. It was a Friday, so I was able to stay away from my parents, cops, teachers, etc. for a few days. I went to L's house, along with M. L's father was home at first, but only people at L's house from 12:45 PM Friday to 4 PM Saturday were me, M, and L. We also got some ice cubes, Jolly Ranchers, and orange juice. We had everything ready and planned out by about 1 PM. All names and phone numbers have been changed in this story. The first thing I did was eat the nutmeg. I had a full 1.1 ounce bottle of it. I ate mouthfuls of nutmeg at a time, swallowed as fast as I could, then drank the orange juice. I ended up eating that whole bottle of nutmeg, a very hard thing to do without puking. I got very close to puking, but stopped myself. I waited until 1:32 PM, then I swallowed the DXM pills. Caricodin, cough plus cold, 16 pills, 480 milligrams of DXM. At 1:45, I ate the moonflower seeds, 2 pods of about 2¼ in diameter, about 140 seeds, uncooked, not dried. Then, I snorted a little less than half of the Vicodin pill and 1/2 of the Ritalin pill. I started feeling dizzy and lightheaded by 1:53. It was around 2:40 when I started feeling the Ritalin. I think it was the Ritalin. I was hyper and dizzy. I also think that the moonflower trip had started too, and I was definitely feeling the DXM. I wanted to get high from the weed, so I smoked about a dime. I had a 1/4 for me to smoke, while L and M had 8 for the nose for them to share. L and M smoked a couple bowls between them, and we just sat around and talked till about 3:10 when M was telling me I'd better drink the alcohol and smoke the rest of the weed, because I would be tripping too hard. I smoked the rest of the weed, but it really hurt my throat. I had a bad dry mouth from the moonflower as well. I was sucking on ice cubes while I was smoking, and that helped a little, although the Jolly Ranchers didn't work quite as good. The last thing to do was drink the alcohol, so I drank a screwdriver that L made with about 4 shots of vodka, and drank about a cup of Captain Morgan's Parrot Bay coconut rum. L's dad bought it and the vodka, then he left for work. He didn't know anything about the other drugs though. Tell you what, I felt really fucked up. The only things I remember after this was watching parts of the first 5 or 10 minutes of Scream 3, which M rented, and I was talking some during it. The rest of the story is what L and M told me, as I don't remember any of it, except for parts of my dreams. When we were watching the rest of the movie, I kept leaving the room. M followed me, and I guess I just wandered around his house. He would tell me to come back to the room, and I would respond by just blabbing on like, "Oh, he doesn't have the pipe, but I bet the gym will." Or, "Seriously, I thought you weren't." M would just then lead me back into his room. I said something like, "I saw the dogs burn my throat," and pointed to my mouth. Then, I tried to run to the bathroom, but I kept falling and stumbling, so I crawled to his trash can and puked in it twice in a row. My eyes were very bloodshot by now. My pupils were dilated and my eyes were wide open. I even peed my pants at about 4, and at 4:45 I could hardly even breathe. I tried to talk, but when no sound came out, I just pointed to my mouth and started crying. I was drinking a lot of orange juice and eating ice cubes and Jolly Ranchers to try and get rid of the dry mouth. It wasn't until about 6:25 PM that I finally passed out on the floor of Em's room. In my sleep, I was twitching quite a lot, and I was saying everything out loud. My friend stayed awake to make sure I didn't break anything, and sometimes I woke up and rearranged things for no reason, like putting a stack of paper in the freezer and moving the TV around the room. From 6:30 PM to 3:20 AM, I was talking, but I slept until 6:15. These are some of the things my friends remember me saying. "Seriously?" To which I said at least 8 times. "Is B there? Isn't this 5550934? B is one of my friends. "Is R there? It's already 8. What's taking you so long?" R is my weed dealer. It was about 11 PM when I said that. "Why? Get in here." "Why is my brother?" I yelled this very, very loud. "Man, where'd the bowl go? It was right here." I said this a lot, sometimes saying joint instead of bowl, and would open my eyes most of the times I said it. "You can't do that already." And that was it. I remember everything after I woke up though. When I woke up, I was still tripping off the moonflower, but everything else had worn off. I was hearing things and felt kinda drunk. As for visual hallucinations, I only remember 2. Some moving green blob on my door and colour differences. "Why are we talking so much, man? Last night was so trippy to see you like that," Em told me. I had no idea what he was actually talking about. Then Em and L told me about how I was talking for such a very, very long time. The only things I remember dreaming about were calling B on the phone and walking around my school. I stayed at Em's house, but L went home at 8 AM. I went home at 3 PM. Em said I was talking to people that weren't there, but I stopped around 2:15 PM. Let me tell you, I was sick for about 3 days after that, and L gave me that well-deserved 1/4 ounce. So, in conclusion, I would recommend never combining too many drugs, ever. What I did was very stupid, and almost caused me to die. Oh my god. We've really effed up. An AMT, MDMA, ketamine, and 2CT7 trip report by Annan of IBID, posted to earwid.org September 14th, 2000. There's been a lot of discussion recently about safety and psychedelics due to several recent events in our local community. In particular, I was involved in a series of events over the weekend that I feel it is important to bring to the attention of our community, in the context of helping others avoid our mistakes. I'm doing so anonymously to protect the identities of the individuals involved, though I do have permission from the primary individual to discuss her circumstance here. Before I begin, I do want to make a few general comments. One thing that is apparent to me as I've grown up in this community is that there are many standards for what people consider safe psychedelic technique and practice. It is my goal, as I grow and learn, to try to respect and understand a wide range of opinions and find a balance between risk and caution that I consider acceptable. I think what often makes it hard for people to discuss their mistakes with the group is that it is very easy to wind up on the receiving end of some harsh judgmentalism, the "I can't believe you were so stupid" sort of response, which inhibits sharing of future mistakes due to embarrassment and other factors. I definitely feel that criticism and critique are useful and important. I'm mainly asking for community support as I describe these events. You cannot possibly be harsher on us at this point than we are on ourselves. In the meantime, we honestly want people to know what we learned, and how we learnt it. If these things seem obvious to you, please understand that we are all coming at this journey from wildly different places in our lives, and I've seen common sense defined differently over and over again by very smart people who simply disagree on certain fundamentals. For the most part, the weekend was rather beautiful. This was the third in a series of multi-day, multiple substance experience that a small group of us had engaged upon together in various combinations. The 7 of us are, for the most part, very experienced with psychedelics in general. Years and years of experience among us, in fact, with only one individual really being a newcomer to the vast majority of the substances we typically do as a group. We started off the evening with AMT, a drug that some find annoying, but which every member of our group finds to be quite a wonderful drug, like MDMA but without the mad scramble to squeeze it all in before it wears off. AMT features 2 hours of nausea up front, which can be mitigated with the less drowsy formula of Dramamine. After that, it's a very, very long experience, 12 hours at least. A very leisurely and enjoyable ride though. After the AMT had pretty much wound down completely, we took MDMA. From a safety perspective, some have suggested that combining AMT and MDMA is an unsafe move because AMT is an MAO inhibitor, and MDMA does not combine well with MAOIs. My response to that is that we are taking the MDMA well after the AMT has essentially run its course, not stacking the peaks, and have never noticed any untoward physical effects. Moreover, as some have heard of this weekend, the mistaken impression seems to be that we were stacking many concurrent peaks. The actual technique, which to me seems much more rational and acceptable, was to essentially let one drug finish out its course entirely before starting on the next. This is much less aggressive physically than stacking concurrent peaks. It gives you time to fully enjoy one substance before moving on, and really does manage to avoid bad synergies. However, it's still an aggressive move. You wind up gradually more and more exhausted, and thus more physically and emotionally open to the drugs that are later in the schedule. It's not at all without risk, but it was within the acceptable range for what every member of this group considered comfortable. After the MDMA, some bumps of ketamine occurred, and then a couple people drifted off to sleep. Ketamine at very high doses is dissociative, but at very low doses, it acts as a very mild repotentiator of whatever you happen to be on. It's a very enjoyable state, I must say. At the end of the MDMA, some folks moved on to 2CB. Most people managed to squeeze in at least a few hours napping after that. As a group, we were all having a wonderful time, eating split pea soup throughout to keep our spirits up, reminding each other to stay very hydrated, etc. One thing we did not do, though, was utilise a sober sitter for the duration of the experience. It's been my experience with this community that sober sitters are rarely particularly encouraged, no matter what the experience may be. It happens occasionally, but it's not a rigid rule of thumb. I've participated in dozens of experiences, with combinations, with new substances, with new people, where sitters seemed optional due to the experience of the people involved. It's not overconfidence, mind you, it's just confidence, which I've noticed is something many people in this group seem to have. Not a confidence that nothing can go wrong per se, but a confidence that if something does go wrong, it can be handled. That was the mindset we were in, and for the most part, as we approached day 2. In hindsight now, I would consider this the first of our small, but very serious mistakes. After getting up from our naps, 2CT7 was on the agenda. One member of our group bowed out in order to get some sleep. Of the rest of us, only 2 had really had a threshold dose of 2CT7 before. The rest were either new to the substance or had not taken a threshold dose previously. A lot happened to us from that point on, and I don't intend to comment on all of it. From a safety perspective, I will focus on one individual though, whom I'll refer to as Melissa, obviously not a real name. Melissa had never taken T7 before. I informed her that people were considering 20 milligrams as a good starter dose, and that some people were finding 20 milligrams to be an extremely intense dose as well, and that you should start with 20 milligrams, boost your way up if you wanted to. One of the other women in the group told Melissa that she had tried 30 milligrams and found it okay, but that she was going to do 40 milligrams this time. Another woman in our group had done 40 milligrams previously and found that to be boring. The men in our group are all very much high doses, and we were not particularly used as data points in her decision. I believe we were all doing 60 and 70 milligrams. In the end, Melissa chose 40 as a dose. In retrospect, I regret not being more forceful about considering 20 milligrams as a starting point. I also feel that Melissa didn't spend nearly enough time educating herself about T7. She came to it with very little, if any, understanding of what others' experiences with it had been, and I guess she should have just done more research. She was essentially trusting all of us, and that was a mistake. It's the kind of mistake you make when you really trust the people you're with, but there's no excuse not to do the research, and we all should have spent more time right at that point discussing what was about to happen. That being said though, the first 4 hours of the T7 were marvellous and wondrous in many ways. T7 can be an amazing substance, truly beautiful. Melissa was having a wonderful time by her own account, and so none of us were on alert. The one sober person in the house was asleep at that point. Melissa announced that she was going out for a cigarette, something she'd been doing all night. For some reason, none of her usual smoking buddies went with her. In fact, no one went with her. We realised about 15 minutes later that she hadn't come back, and that she'd gone out alone. It was a rather difficult realisation to make. A realisation of the, oh my god, we really fucked up this time, variety. We went out to do a quick look for her, but she was long gone. We called likely spots that she might have headed to, but she hadn't been sighted. Hours went by. We reasoned that Melissa was a pretty hardcore tripper, known to be able to walk the streets of major cities on LSD without much trouble, and she knew the neighbourhood we were in. She'd even taken walks earlier in the day, accompanied though, and she perhaps just wanted some time alone, I guess, to appreciate the experience. But still, we were all extremely unsettled. Other things happened while she was gone that led me to state categorically that 2CT7 is worth extreme caution. It is wonderful, but it is an extremely strong psychedelic. You must be careful. Approximately 4 hours later, Melissa returned. Her story was chilling. She remembers walking down the street away from my apartment. The next thing she remembers is being in a man's car. She doesn't even know how she got in the car. She remembers them stopping at a 7-Eleven and asking him to pick up some water for her. She remembers him taking her to a friend's apartment. She remembers them asking her if she was drunk and responding she was on 2CT7, which of course they did not recognise. She remembers asking for a telephone and not being given one. They asked her what her name was and where she lived, and she couldn't even remember that. What she does remember was watching cartoons for a period of time, and she also remembers her pants coming off, asking, "Where's my pants?" Her underwear stayed on, and she believes nothing sexual happened, and eventually they brought her back to my apartment and let her go. She had left the apartment without shoes on and without a wallet, meaning she had no identification with her at all. A few days after the event, Melissa is doing reasonably well. Her temperament is typically very upbeat and resilient, and her friends have tried to stay in close touch with her. In the hours after her return to the apartment, emotions ran high. We were so fortunate that someone we loved had come that close to extreme physical endangerment and had made it back to us. She was very, very shaken, of course, and so were the rest of us, for that matter. Some people have suggested that it was completely irresponsible not to have a sitter for this experience. Considering our relative inexperience with 2CT7 as a group, I do actually agree with this. It's just not something I'm accustomed to though, after years of never bothering. As far as the multiple substance aspect of it all, I don't feel that our technique is particularly unsafe, but clearly that's a subjective statement. Melissa had done AMT and MDMA, come down completely and slept for several hours, 6 or 7 at least, before the T7, so I don't personally attribute much of the intensity to combination effects, but clearly there is a little of that present regardless. I think I'd have a smaller group next time, and I'd encourage a sitter in cases where new drugs were being employed. It seems so obvious now, but that's typically how many people learn, by making obvious mistakes. We're just very, very lucky that nothing worse happened. In terms of physical endangerment, there's one other scary story that I'm personally aware of. I know of one individual, a hardcore tripper, who decided to take mimosa ayahuasca alone in his apartment. He literally came back to consciousness while driving his car at high speed out of the city, fleeing on the freeway from whatever it was that had scared him back in his apartment. He has no real memory of how he managed to get out of town whatsoever. Obviously he could have used a sitter as well. To conclude, I just want to say that I'm very sorry that this actually happened. I feel very foolish, but I'd feel more foolish if we didn't learn from our mistakes and communicate them with you all. I've heard far too many times, "Oh, I've never had a bad trip," from the young and old alike, with that telling undercurrent of, "and I never will." As Sasha Shulgin states quite clearly, there are no insignificant psychedelic experiences, and an attitude of cockiness or complacency is not your friend in these matters. It can happen to you. You can find yourself, after 10 solid years of having safe and reasonable experiences, suddenly in new and uncomfortable territory. The value of this list is that we can share our experiences and our ideas in a relatively safe environment. We know that some of us are greater risk takers than others, but we are all ultimately sharing a desire to see each other taken care of, to see each other healthy and vibrant and well. This is an asset we can utilise. For my part, I have long ago stopped speaking publicly on these matters. My reputation precedes me in too many ways, and it's hard to penetrate the noise of that reputation. I'm known for what seems to be reckless high-dose behaviour. But most people don't get beneath the surface of that to see what motivates me. I am constantly questioning the value of this path in my life. It is one of the biggest single spiritual and moral issues I wrestle with, and I don't believe I ever take these experiences for granted anymore. The reason is that when I was younger, I was extremely cocky and arrogant, and I did pay a price for it over and over again, with too many bad trips to count. I literally count my blessings that it's been years since I've had that kind of trip, and I know if I'm not careful, it could happen to me again. It's part of why I can talk to people so easily and fluidly when they're in trouble. Bring them back. Something I'm also known for at this point. It's because I really have had to work to pull myself back from disgusting and awful places, where even those closest to me just wanted to get the fuck away from me rather than put up with my shit again. At this point in my life, I take high doses because that's what works for me. I don't try to encourage anyone to join me, rather I just want people to feel like they know what they're doing and respect their own needs. I don't know if that's true throughout the community, but I sincerely hope it is. I feel broken-hearted about this weekend, but in a sense it has brought us together, and we are honestly endeavouring to learn. I appreciate those of you who have taken the time to talk to us about it on IRC or in person, and who have scolded us without insulting us. It honestly does remind me that I'm genuinely happy to call this place home. A Battle for Earth's Existence. An Amanita muscaria and belladonna trip report by Sleepwalker. Posted to earwid.org October 22nd, 2013. This experience took place during a time in my life that was very tumultuous. I was a college student at the time, and had been smoking pot daily for a couple of years before I was arrested for possessing alcohol underage, and for some absurd reason, was placed on probation for 1 year. During this time, I had to take a drug-alcohol test once a month. This prevented my habit of smoking to continue for a while, which caused me to begin to find other mind-altering and easy-to-obtain drugs that wouldn't be tested for. I first ordered an ounce of grade B amanitas, and ate about 10 grams on my first experience. This gave me a lightheaded, euphoric feeling, in which I felt strong, and felt strangely flexible, like I could stretch my body into forms I previously could not. The experience lasted 3 to 4 hours, and overall was very mild and disappointing, since I was hoping for a lot more. I then ate the other roughly 18 grams a few days later, and felt much the same effects with only a slight increase in intensity. This may be because I didn't give my body enough time to rid itself of the tolerance it accumulated from the first experience, but nevertheless, I was determined to experience the full effects this drug could give me, and so I ordered an ounce of grade A amanitas, and also a large quantity of belladonna root, which for some reason aroused my interest while researching its deadly yet visionary qualities. When these items arrived in the mail, I decided to eat the whole ounce of amanitas along with a small 2-inch long piece of the root to perhaps enhance the experience. I began consuming the mushrooms around 6 PM, by balling up each cap and swallowing them, as I had read this was the recommended method of consumption. It took maybe 15 minutes to consume the ounce, and then I chewed on the 2-inch belladonna root, which I thought tasted pleasantly piney. My mindset at the time was very positive and optimistic of having an interesting yet not overpowering experience that evening, so I made the trip to a friend's house to play some cards and watch TV during the experience. The 30 minutes of time since consumption rolled by without any feeling out of the ordinary. It wasn't until about an hour after consumption when I began feeling very lightheaded and my vision began to slowly fade. 1 second, I'd fall back into the couch and feel like going to sleep, and the next I would explode up with a burst of energy like I was ready to run a marathon, which my friends thought was very, very strange. The lethargic feeling ended up drowning out the energetic feeling after about 15 to 30 minutes. The effects came on very fast around that 1 hour point, so it had no bearing on the time that went by from that point until 3 hours later. The following is what little I remember of this time, as well as what my friends told me transpired. The first thing I remember is laying back on the couch looking at the TV with no auditory senses at all, and my vision very, very tunneled. This tunneling gave me the feeling that I was inside the TV, taking part in whatever it was being aired at the time. I remember glancing over at my friends as they would walk into the room, see their lips moving as they were trying to talk to me, but I heard nothing. They later said I had a very intense look on my face, like I was angry, but would obviously never respond to their questions, which I'm sure was a little annoying. The next thing I remember is what tunnel vision I had transforming into vision of an animated land of rolling hills, like a painting that I was walking around in. I remember feeling very at peace and not at all frightened or paranoid. There were many animals such as deer and squirrels and dogs and horses all running around happily while I walked amongst them. My next vision took me to a large hall that looked like the throne room of a castle. There were only 2 other beings in this room besides myself, and what they looked like I do not recall. I only remember that one was the master of everything, and the other was a subordinate of a more evil nature standing next to me. The head being instructed me that I was to take place in a contest that would decide the fate of every living creature on Earth, and that my opponent was the evil being standing next to me. While I don't recall what they looked like, I can remember their voices very vividly. The master spoke in a loud, deep voice that made it clear who was in charge, and the evil one's voice was higher pitched and raspy, like a grumbling of sorts. The rules of the contest were that the master would ask a simple question, and whoever could answer first won. If I won, I would return to my life and would be granted a long life of happiness, but if the evil one won, I would return to a world empty of all living creatures except myself, and would live an eternity in this lonely void. The master began asking very simple questions in which both myself and the evil one would answer at the exact same time, as if the evil one was really an alter ego of myself. I remember feeling so intense trying to beat this thing, but also feeling like it was not possible at all. My friends later told me that during this time, I was leaning over the living room table in front of the couch, rocking back and forth, holding both my pointer fingers out like I was punching a button every few seconds. How strange that must have looked to them. The contest continued for what seemed like hours, and seemed like we tied hundreds of questions presented to us, until finally one question was asked, something about colour, the answer being red, and I had a lapse in concentration and the evil one defeated me, and I just remember screaming in this dream world like one who had just doomed the world. At that very second, I snapped out of this vision and found myself sitting on the couch where I had been before losing consciousness, feeling as if I was completely sober, and instantly I jumped and yelled the names of my friends who were not in the room because, well, I honestly thought they'd gone along with everyone else in the world. To my relief, they were in another room playing ping pong, and I felt the largest burden lifted off of me I have ever felt at one moment. It took me a little while to gain my composure after such an intense trip. The strangest thing to me was how I so suddenly went from a dream world state to nearly completely sober, and on perfect cue with the climax of my vision. I believe that there's some strange realms of the unconscious mind that most people don't know exist, and enough of these mind-altering drugs can take you there, but you must enter at your own risk because not every mind can bend without breaking. I later had a terrible experience of a larger quantity of the belladonna root, in which I thought I would die, and I probably did permanent damage to my liver and kidneys. How much effect the small portion of belladonna had on this experience, I couldn't tell you for sure. I do think it contributed to the drowsy effects I felt, as my subsequent belladonna experience felt the same way. It must be said that I will never ever venture into the world of Alice in Wonderland again, although sometimes I do feel the urge. Flying ointment and having visions. A belladonna, datura, mandrake, valerian and cinquefoil trip report by Grimir Inia Drenga. Posted to earwid.org November 16th, 2020. As a practicing occultist very interested in the old-fashioned traditional ideas of witchcraft, as well as primitive shamanism, the Solanaceae family of plants, belladonna, henbane, datura, mandrake, etc., have held a strong interest for me for quite some time. The legends of witches and warlocks lathering themselves with the flying ointment and having visions of flying to Mount Brocken to hold these wild revelries and orgiastic rites of demons or the devil himself are widely known and recounted vividly in many medieval witch hunters' documents. I did extensive research before I finally decided to order some belladonna and datura off the internet. I looked at a wide variety of articles and experience reports to try and get a general idea of what was a safe psychoactive dose, as opposed to what was a deadly one. After I felt confident and knew what I was doing, I ordered some witch's flying ointment, as well as some belladonna plant matter, as well as 2 ounces of datura. The datura was all parts of the plant: stems, leaves, flowers, and some seeds. The flying ointment contained belladonna as well as mandrake, valerian, and cinquefoil. First night. When I finally received these items in the mail, I waited until the evening and first lathered a moderate-sized dab onto my temples, wrists, the back of my neck, and also my chest, as recommended by the seller. After about half hour, I began to feel slight effects coming on. The first sign, as many have said before, was the drying out of the throat, the feeling of thirst which drinking cannot quench. Secondly, my vision began to become warped. After about an hour, nothing more happened, so I realised it not had been a high enough dose to experience the psychoactive effects I was after. I had a calming, sedative sensation instead. My heart felt warm, and I looked in the mirror and found my pupils were slightly dilated, but nothing more than that so far. I take it upon myself to pinch a small amount of the belladonna and 2 datura leaves, making hot tea out of them. I waited 20 minutes for it to cool and drank all of it down. In all honesty, it didn't actually taste that bad at all, just planty like a lot of herbal teas are. About 45 minutes later, some mild psychoactive effects began to kick in. The effects I got now were mildly psychedelic. I kept hearing what sounded like whispering voices that seemed to come from everywhere, but when I listened closer, I could not catch what they were saying, just ghostly, disembodied, mumbling voices. The more I tried to listen to them to hear what they were saying, they would get quieter or stop like they knew I was listening and didn't want me to hear them. I also kept hearing the sound of a powerful, ghostly, moaning wind, although looking outside, there was no wind. I looked in the mirror again and saw that my pupils were now hugely dilated. Everything seemed to kind of sparkle away, and everything seemed impossibly beautiful. Things that I would normally take for granted or pay no attention to suddenly had this inexplicable allure to them. I was mildly delirious and forgetful, trying to turn off the lights that were already off and forgetting what I was doing, just staring off into space for, well, who knows how long before realising I was standing in place like a statue. After this, no more profound effects occurred. I realised it still hadn't been a high enough dose for a serious trip or mystical experience, so I soon went to bed, as I found it made me very, very tired, probably partly because of the valerian in the flying ointment. And to be honest, I had some of the most vivid lucid dreams I've ever had in my life. In these dreams, I was floating down long, dimly lit corridors and making beautiful things and people appear for my own amusement. I remember flying in all my dreams that night. Some of the dreams were even sexual in nature, and when I woke up a couple of times in the night, I found that I was extremely aroused. I did some research on this possible effect of the plants from the Solanaceae family, and found that belladonna has, in some cases, been used historically as an aphrodisiac for men, but from what I gathered from my research, it is not likely to have this effect on women. When I awoke the next day, I found that my vision was quite blurry, but thankfully was gone by the evening time. The strange thing about this blurry vision is that only certain things were actually blurry. Most things I could actually see clearly, but writing in particular was so blurry that it was almost impossible to read. I couldn't text all day because I just couldn't see what I was writing worth a damn. But like I said, this side effect was gone by the following evening. Second night. When my vision and equilibrium was back to normal the following night, I resolved around 11 PM to try it all again, and this time to use twice as much, hoping to reach the proper dose for a mystical and/or divinatory experience. So, I lathered on 2 liberal dabs of the flying ointment in the same places as before. I even went and made another tea, this time with 2 pinches of the belladonna plant, and 2 datura leaves and 1 datura flower. I drank this tea in about an hour's time. I began to notice the telltale sign of my throat drying out. About half an hour later, I noticed I was having the sensation of doors opening everywhere around me. Not literal doors, mind you, but rather invisible, interdimensional doors. I had the impression that I was becoming aware of another layer of reality spilling over into this one, and although I didn't see them visually, I could perceive entities coming in and out of the doorways and wandering through invisible hallways superimposed over this reality. The general feeling of the presence of others being there around me, moving quickly as if they had no time to waste in getting wherever they were going. I did not get the impression that these entities were either malevolent or benevolent, more neutral in nature, or even totally disinterested in humanity. The faint, inaudible whispering and the strong moaning winds began again. My body began to tingle somewhat in places, and as I was laying on my bed, I kept getting the sensation of floating just above the bed, rather than laying on it. I also got the real strong urge to urinate about every 30 seconds, but when I would try, nothing or almost nothing would come out, and even when it did, it was a strain. The tropane alkaloid containing plants are known for causing this side effect. It's not at all painful, just slightly annoying. I experienced none of the nausea or vomiting others have reported of this. In fact, I felt quite good. It actually seemed to make me very hungry, although eating was surely impossible. I tried to eat some goldfish crackers, and although they tasted ridiculously amazing, the texture in my arid, dry mouth and throat was like sand and was very, very difficult to swallow. I had to wash it down with water. So, after this, I just entirely gave up on eating. But being so thirsty, I kept on drinking water, and found that I needed to take small sips because if I gulped it, which I was very tempted to do, I would feel like I was starting to choke on it. Once again, and even more so than the night before, I found myself delirious and forgetful, wandering around and then stopping for what seemed like a long while, lost in trance. And then, suddenly, I would wake up and half realise I'd just been staring into space for who knows how long. I did some scrying, which is gazing into a black mirror made of obsidian, for the purpose of divination, and in my trance state, I had a vision of floating across vast space and time to visit my lover, who was about 2 hours away from me. I saw him clear as day in the mirror, and I gave him loving, sensual energy, and also took some of his, which is a practice of psychic vampirism, an energy exchange. Whether this was real or simply a hallucinatory effect, no one could ever really know. But I will say, it seemed as real as anything ever could. After I was done with that, I wandered around, finding that my balance was atrocious and I nearly fell or ran into things several times.
I also recall suddenly bursting into hysterical laughter at some profound revelation in my mind, although I do not actually remember what it was, unfortunately. The sense of time I was experiencing right now was rather warped as well, and time seemed to be going very, very slowly. I remember watching an hour-and-a-half long movie called Mr. Jones, which seemed somehow absurdly profound to me at the time, but the movie, well, it seemed to go on for hours. I didn't know what time it was because my vision was too blurred to read digital clocks. I only became vaguely aware of how late it was when I ventured into the bathroom for about the millionth time and saw the dim light of morning shining in through the window. So I went to bed, very tired once again, and once again had very vivid, semi-lucid dreams. But now, this time, they were mostly unpleasant. Some were even nightmarish. I remember one of them involving me looking into the minds of many of my friends and family members, and discovering what they truly thought and felt about me. And most of all, it was not only unpleasant, but very mean. I remember screaming and crying and fighting with my mother in one of them. She was acting cruel and evil, very much unlike how she has ever acted in real life for the most part. She was calling me foul, derogatory names like faggot and things like that. In this dream, she hated me for being a homosexual, but in real life this hasn't been an issue since my young teenage years. I think that one was more of a psychological remnant of bitterness and resentment about things that happened between me and her in the distant past, which I suppose I've never actually fully come to terms with. I don't really remember much about the rest of the dreams, except for one, which thankfully wasn't a nightmare. I saw my mother going out on the porch and unplugging the Halloween lights I had put up for a decoration because it was going to rain. And then I saw her getting into a car and going to the grocery store. This was nothing epic or profound, but when I awoke I found that she had in fact done both of those things. Psychic dream or coincidence? Was this an out-of-body experience in which I was following my mother around, watching what she was doing? Well, I couldn't say. Believe what you want to believe. The next day, or today, I awoke and found my vision was blurred twice as bad, which makes sense because I did take twice as much. It is 12:30 at night now, and my vision is still blurred over 24 hours later, to the point that I could not even read text, let alone respond to them. I had to write this as a Word document in huge print just to be able to see it, and then copy and paste it. All in all, I would say this was a pleasant experience, although I still didn't quite reach the level that I wanted, and next time I plan on doubling the dose again. I must say, I am a fan, and I will definitely be doing it again sometime. Of course, it must be said that I do not endorse anyone doing this plant solely for the purpose of getting high, because it really isn't about that. I believe in a certain kind of animism, and I think that the spirit or essence of these plants knows when the user's intentions are pure and sacred, or simply vulgar, recreational pleasure-seeking, and it will treat the user accordingly.
We Are the Gods, which is the universe. A magic mushrooms, 4-HOMET, and methoxetamine trip report, posted to earwid.org on February 23rd, 2012, by the user Mind Explorer. Background: I'm a psychonaut, and have experimented with DMT, ayahuasca, MET, DIPT, shrooms, 4-HOMET, 5-MeO-MIPT, 2CD, 2CE, 2CI, 25-MBOME, MDMA, MDMC, 4-MMC, and MXE. I've used 4-HOMET 3 times, MXE 3 times, and shrooms a dozen times. I feel comfortable with those 3 substances, and I thoroughly enjoy them. Set. I've mentally prepared myself for this journey by decreasing my alcohol and marijuana consumption this week, as well as reading Plato's Republic and listening to Terence McKenna. Earlier today, I ran for 30 minutes straight and went into the sauna for 10 minutes to rid myself of toxins. I've eaten 2 small meals, a protein shake and a multivitamin today.
I waited 4 hours after my last meal before ingesting the substances. I prepared hot chocolate to drink with the shrooms. Setting. Today is the 11th of the 11th of the 11th. A reason for ritual. The trees decided to rid themselves of leaves today as well. The time was right. I've converted my bedroom into a shamanic sanctuary. My mattress pad is on the floor, covered with soft pillows and blankets, while my bed just has a comforter and one pillow. I've unplugged most of the electronics in my room, except for my laptop and phone. I plan on laying in my bed in total darkness, listening to Spangle and Native American Icaros through my speakers. My phone will be left on record mode in case I want to record my thoughts. I journey alone. Start 9:09 PM. Ate 1 gram of mushrooms, drinking hot chocolate to mask the taste. 9:15. Consumed 25 milligrams of MXE and orange juice. 9:35. I begin to feel off baseline. I feel a little drunk and I can tell that the MXE is beginning to take effect. 9:40. I started the soundtrack I prepared for this night. I placed 50 milligrams of MXE and 20 milligrams of 4-HOMT under my tongue and turned off all the lights. Then, I lay down in my bed and let the journey begin. The first part of this report was written before my trip. From here on out, I based my time estimations on the soundtrack I created. For convenience, I would like to place the 0 hours mark at 9:40 when I started the soundtrack. I'm writing this the next day. I swallowed some of my saliva. It was accompanied by a really bitter taste, and I began to notice some mild hallucinations. I could feel the synergy of all the drugs interacting with one another, fighting for dominance. Right now, I feel in control. 20 minutes. The MXE seems to be dominating the trip. I feel calm, lightweight, and very euphoric. The hallucinations alternate from the blocky, fluid-like MXE visuals to the grid-like tryptamine visuals of the mushrooms. It comes in waves, and I still feel in control of this experience. 30 minutes. I notice that the hallucinations have kicked up a notch now. I see dark trails behind my hands as I move them around, and I look around the room and realise that I'm tripping very hard and might not be in control of this for much longer. So I swallow all the powder that was left in my mouth and I washed it down with water and orange juice, swishing the liquid around my mouth. I notice that I can't feel the bottom of my mouth at all where the chemicals were, but I don't care. I just lay back down in my bed and feel waves of energy coursing through my body. Right now, I have no nausea, feel calm, and are very comfortable. 40 minutes. Things get very weird. The hallucinations begin to become real, and time starts to lose meaning. My consciousness becomes fluid and starts to break apart like a liquid. 1 hour, ? At this point, ordinary reality was completely obliterated. I felt like I'd broken a hole in the space-time continuum, and every human being on Earth was aware that this had occurred. I will now attempt to describe what happened as best I can, but I can only tell it as a story. I'd embarked on a shamanic journey. Many have travelled this path before. At first I was lost, so I allowed the spirits to guide me, which was my only source of comfort. But there were many of them to choose from, many enticing me, but I wouldn't let myself get taken over by them, because I couldn't tell which ones were good and which ones were evil. This happened in cycles. Every time that I left the comfort of a spirit, I came closer to death. It was a process, and I realised that reality was a creation of my mind, and that I had become my environment. Once I became more aware of this new form of existence, I realised that what I thought were spirits were actually shamans around the world. They were people on Earth right now that were connecting with me in this hyperdimensional energy field. I entered a connection with a shaman that was somewhere in South America, and through him, I began to learn how to use my new powers. We began to create energy fields, but I would struggle against the connection. I was concerned that I was participating in black magic of some kind. I didn't know if it was good or bad, but when I struggled against the connection, I was brought closer to death. At some point, I thought I was actually dying. I was on the cusp of being alive and dead, but something deep within me said, "No, you will not die. You must choose to live." "But how?" I asked. "You must become," it replied. I began to wave my hands around in a circular motion, which was responsible for forming the world around me. I started to take deep breaths in and out, in and out. That's how I knew that I was alive. But whenever I reached what I thought was the peak, I'd come back down to the cusp of death, and was stuck in this loop. Every time that I came back down, I was closer to death itself. Through this process, I became more and more powerful. Terence McKenna himself was with me, and he told me, "You can do it. You can do it. Don't give up. Remember what you have learned. Every single occurrence in your life has led to this moment. This is real. This is actually happening. Novelty is reaching the infinite point, the end of history." I felt as if I was in a birthing process. I could feel the presences of the DMT elves, and they encouraged me to do something. At first, it was very difficult, and I thought it was impossible. But deep down inside me, I realized that I was the Messiah. I was the one. I was Neo. I would succeed where everybody before me had failed. This was the purpose of my life. This was why I existed. I began to move around my bed in strange motions, and I felt like I was hatching out of a cosmic egg. I started to become more godlike. And then, I became God. I realized that I am responsible for all of existence. I became the One, which is the universe, which is the mind. You did it. You finally did it. You fulfilled the prophecy. All of the elves were cheering me on. I could hear thousands of people cheering. This is what the machine elves had always wanted us to do. And I felt like the first human to do it. I felt like I had accomplished something of extreme importance. At this point, I became the entire universe. I was reality. I was existence. I was all that was. I had become. I had the ability to gather all that is, and I held infinite in the palm of my hand. I understood how the whole was contained in each part, and everything was music. I had become spangled. You are me, and I am you. There was no more fear. I was in complete control of everything. I was God, and the very spirits that came to guide me. 3 hours and 30 minutes. Even though I'd become a god, I realised that there was a reason we exist in an animal body, our living vessel. Returning to my animal body from the higher realm was extremely therapeutic. All of the problems and worries in my life are insignificant. It was a true rebirth. Once I regained control of my body, I went to the bathroom and took the best feeling piss of my entire life. I still felt like I was responsible for all of existence, even though now I just had an animal body. I remember turning on the heater in my room and feeling as if I was the heat itself. We are the gods, which is the universe, which is our mind. Commentary. I must warn anybody that has read this far that there are huge risks involved with what I did. I could easily see how somebody with a weaker mind could have gone permanently insane, or died. My ayahuasca experience and knowledge of shamanism, combined with a strong will to live, was what prevented my trip from being bad. With that being said, this was the most profound and therapeutic experience of my entire life. What lessons did I learn? Free will exists. We must choose to live. We are in control of our existence. We are the gods, which is the universe, which is our mind.
If there is a God, he loves fractals. A mescaline, LSD, DMT and XLR11 trip report, posted by Crazy Engineer to earwid.org, September 10th, 2014. Having a fair bit of experience with LSD and DMT, I wanted to try something new for New Year's Eve. My friend and I each took 500 milligrams of mescaline hydrochloride, which we put into gelatin capsules. Having read that mescaline causes nausea, I took it with 30 millilitres of Pepto-Bismol. He took 15 millilitres at first. We were accompanied by another friend who took 2 tabs of LSD, rated at 100 micrograms each. My friend and I are relatively small people, about 120 pounds and 5'5". I am on 10 milligrams of escitalopram. He isn't on any medication at all though. The friend who took the 2 tabs is on 20 milligrams of citalopram. Effects are noticed within the first 30 minutes. It hits about 10 minutes before my friend who took acid felt anything. As the effects build up, so does the nausea. It is quite bearable, mostly an upset stomach and general discomfort. I note that the mescaline is very different from acid in terms of how it hits. It is constant and gradual, and there doesn't seem to be any peaks or high points, like my friend on 2 tabs is experiencing. He's cranked up and energetic, while my friend and I feel incredibly peaceful. The visuals are fairly strong, as far as the visuals I've experienced on acid were like. Christmas lights outside seem brighter, and everything is breathing and warping, and when I look at my carpet with flower patterns on it, it appears as though the flowers are swaying within the wind. The effects continuously build in intensity. About 2 hours in, my nausea is gone. My friend still feels ill, and takes another 15 millilitres of Pepto-Bismol. Within 30 minutes he's totally fine. If I were to do this again, I think going above the recommended 30 millilitres to something like 45 millilitres would have been more effective. Neither of us felt all that uncomfortable though, and neither of us felt the need to vomit. So I suppose that was a happy success. It is interesting to note that relative to LSD, mescaline does not seem to affect one's cognitive abilities nearly as much. A little focus is all that are required to have a regular conversation and appear relatively normal. I didn't necessarily have the desire to do so, as it is much more enjoyable to be silent and take things in, but purchasing cigarettes was a far simpler matter on mescaline than when peaking on LSD. At about the 3-hour mark, my friend on mescaline smokes some marijuana. I smoke a moderate amount of 5-FUR-144, a synthetic cannabinoid that acts like marijuana at low doses, and more like acid at high doses, synesthesia, mild hallucinations, etc. We both begin to see traces. The effect is quite like looking at stereoscopic 3D images that requires red and blue glasses to see. Outlines around everything are obscured by multicoloured traces. This effect subsides after 30 minutes or so, and we're back to the standard effects of the mescaline. A wonderful sense of calm, enhanced colours, warping of patterns and breathing. Our friend on acid eventually leaves, and we're about 4 hours into the mescaline trip. It's feeling as though it is more or less levelling off, so we decide to turn things up. We each take 1 tab of LSD, rated at 100 micrograms each. We feel the acid come on quickly. The calmness of the mescaline is being overridden by the speedy edginess of acid. Our visuals start getting much stronger. Colour intensity is 3 times that of the mescaline alone. Mild LSD-like fractals appear in patterns on the ceiling, but to a fairly minor extent. When the heating system within the house turns on, I hear fast and beautiful guitar solos within my head. My friend, of course, does not hear them. It is merely my mind reinterpreting generic whirs of the rushing air as something very beautiful. The music sounds like nothing I've ever heard before. It's very fast and intricate. I'd never be able to replicate it on paper or hum it, as it's going so quickly, and I don't have the necessary musical talent to transcribe it. About an hour or so into the acid, or so I believe, we haven't really been paying as much time to the clocks aside from whether or not the new year has arrived. We freebase about 50 milligrams out of the machine, which is effectively just a glorified crack pipe with some steel wool. It did not hit anything like DMT typically does. The changes between the two of us off of tinfoil and then A in visuals were very, very minimal. However, the change in our headspace was drastic. The edginess of the acid was totally removed, to be replaced with the sort of single-mindedness that DMT provides. The calm from the mescaline was back stronger than it was before. The next 40 minutes or so feel like a prolonged DMT trip with the mescaline and LSD hybridized visuals. This is very enjoyable, and seems to redirect the trip from a general craziness into a focused and calm direction of external information. It is hard to put into words. As the effects of the DMT seem to subside, I like to smoke a rather substantial portion of 5-FUR-144, and my friend smokes the last of his marijuana. He also takes a very small amount of 5-FUR-144 as well. At this point, things start getting crazy. My visuals immediately go into hyperdrive. The traces come back 7 or 8 times stronger. The edges around my friend are warping along the edges of his face, flowing along his bone and muscle structure. The traces themselves are constantly changing colour, and consist of 3 to 4 layers in constant movement that look much like something from Apocalypto or Maori tattoos. His hair is warping and twisting. He looks very intense, with this sort of psychedelic war paint superimposed over him. Looking around the room, things seem to be resembling Mayan or Incan art. I'm not a religious person per se. I used to be a hardline atheist, and prior to this experience, I would describe myself as agnostic, open to the idea of a higher power. But I was absolutely opposed to any organised religious interpretation of what that power actually is. I've always just viewed chemicals as chemicals. Mescaline was just another drug. At this point though, the imagery I'm seeing in my carpet gets warped into is so strikingly similar to ancient runes and designs from that region of the world that I begin to have my doubts. My friend looks like some sort of ancient warrior, and the plant behind him is warping into amazing designs that at the time seemed to be very mathematically designed. We put on some white noise in the background. We both stopped talking for the majority of the next 3 hours. We both are overwhelmed by sensory input and experience an amazing euphoria. I hear these constant piano solos and other forms of incredibly intricate music within my mind. The synesthesia I'm experiencing is beautiful. I look at something with lots of colour and hear more noise. I look at something simple and the noise is greatly reduced. Everything I look at now has this amazing, beautiful simplicity to it. My friend and I feel that the room we are in is perfect in every single way. As I look to my ceiling, I see incredible, intricate fractals being formed out of the material of the ceiling. They are constantly changing and wonderfully complex. They tessellate with one another, and are beyond virtually anything I have ever seen online. I'm able to control them with my mind, and can have them form anything I imagine within my mind's eye. Over the course of the 3 hours, I found myself contemplating things about life, humanity, God, and the universe. I feel as though I'm lost within the imagination of my childhood, and before me, my every thought is animated on the ceiling. The most profound portion of this experience was when my friend and I were looking at my bookshelf. We were so overwhelmed by this incredible sense of calm, wisdom, and knowledge. It was strange. Without even opening the books, we felt better, smarter. A sense of acceptance and peace that I have never felt so close to experiencing in my life. It was incredibly fulfilling and spiritual. I felt amazing. It simply cannot be put into words though. I recall thinking to myself, this is why we have artists. To put feelings and emotions into forms that cannot be expressed by words. I'm still able to recall that calmness. It is the closest I have ever had to a religious experience. In that moment, I said to my friend, if acid makes me feel beyond a doubt that there is no God, mescaline makes me think that if he does exist, he sure loves math and fractals. After the 3 hours, things went back to the standard mescaline visuals of warping and mild colour intensity. We smoked some more 5-FUR-144 a few more times, and get similar, though lesser in intensity experiences. I can honestly say that this was one of the best experiences of my life. I've never expected this from any sort of drug. All in all, the whole thing lasted about 10 hours. I took a codeine tablet before heading to bed,
and was able to fall asleep within 1 to 2 hours. My friend did not take one, and he was up for the rest of the night, which is about 7 hours. Cambo, ayahuasca, and 5-MeO DMT trip report, posted by Not My Real Name to the Trip Report subreddit 2 years ago. Last weekend, my wife and I did Cambo, followed by ayahuasca, and then followed by Bufo alvarius, or 5-MeO DMT. We had this experience in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, with the same shaman as our last experience. And this was my first time doing Cambo, and it was rough. As far as purging goes, this was some of the most intense bodily purging experiences I've ever had. It's more intense than the purging that I did during any ayahuasca trip so far. The shaman gave me 8 dots of Cambo on my right shoulder. I was sweating so much I could literally feel it pouring out of my veins and off my face. I was shaking, and it was hard to stay upright on my knees at some points. I had this enormous headache that prevented me from being able to respond to people. My vomit was also yellow and very dense. After about 10 minutes of this, it was done, and my throat hurt because of all the acid. We were then moved on to the ayahuasca, and this was my third ayahuasca experience, the second one for my wife. My intention for this entire experience was to let go of a lot of fear and overthinking that I'd been struggling with for the past months. There were 7 of us there in total, and I will also talk about what I have witnessed from their experiences, especially my wife's, whose experience was especially interesting, and my own experience wouldn't have been complete without the lessons she had learnt through hers. Before we took ayahuasca, we all had rapé, a type of tobacco that clears the sinuses. The rapé gets blown into the nose of a pipe by the shaman. I took 1 full cup of ayahuasca, and we all laid down for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes had passed, the shaman offered us yopo, another type of tobacco that is administered similarly to rapé. It helps the DMT and ayahuasca move more easily to the brain. During my previous ayahuasca experience, I also took it. But after taking it last time, I just saw these geometric shapes and puked and passed out. I didn't really remember anything of it. I chose to take half a cup more of ayahuasca and wait patiently. My wife also chose to wait, but everyone else had yopo. Nearly immediately, everyone else started purging. One woman in the group, let's call her Daisy for her own privacy, started laughing after purging and was talking out loud to ayahuasca constantly. She was having a great time, and even though I'm sure many of us, including me, found it a little annoying at times, I didn't try to focus on that, and instead chose to focus on being happy for her. I was glad that she was having a good and valuable experience for herself. Pretty soon, Daisy started talking to family members that were dead, something I didn't know ayahuasca was capable of doing. Daisy went back and forth between talking to dead people, purging, dancing, and helping others with their own experiences. She was seeing auras and also kept saying, "Out!" whenever I would throw up later. At this point, my wife was deep in her own experience, but I still didn't feel much of anything. I decided to ask the shaman for a little bit of yopo, just to make sure it wouldn't completely knock me out instantly. Pretty soon after I had the yopo, I started purging into my bucket. My vomit was pitch black and had a consistency of charcoal-like ink. After purging, I had this huge headache. I lay down on my side feeling like shit, and the overthinking then began to commence. I didn't have nearly as deep of a connection with ayahuasca as the people around me. Part of me was afraid that I wouldn't experience anything, but another part of me knew that I had to let go and trust that whatever I was experiencing right now is what I truly needed. It's not like I've never had a good ayahuasca experience before. For example, my first Aya experience was wonderful, and I did that one in the Netherlands. During that experience, ayahuasca told me a lot of things. For example, it told me I would get married to a woman with long dark brown hair and have a son. Ayahuasca asked me to name my first son. I named him Troy. Although my son isn't born yet, I met and married my wife who perfectly fits the description. Although I will admit, it's not hard to find someone to fit that description really. Ayahuasca also told me that my life would be easy from then on, that I'd suffered enough and learned all the lessons I needed to learn. I was happy to hear this, but part of me didn't really believe it yet. Even though I believe there is immense power in these spiritual guides, it is hard to believe everything they tell you. There was more to my first experience, but I just wanted to include the most relevant stuff above. This ayahuasca experience stayed pretty much the same. I kept having a headache. I just told myself that it was ayahuasca rewiring my brain, and tried to focus on trusting that this is what I needed. I had some self-dialogue that helped me make peace with my overthinking, and I also felt a heightened intuition. Before I tell you what happened when I took 5-MeO DMT, I want to tell you a little about my wife's experience of ayahuasca, mainly a few events that took place and things ayahuasca told her that I found very interesting. First, she went through a bit of struggle before loving and forgiving some bad players in her past. Then, she laid back down and thought her experience was done. Nope. Ayahuasca started telling her all sorts of very interesting stuff. First off, Aya told her that she was one incarnation of the Indian god Kali, I was one incarnation of Shiva, and Daisy was an incarnation of Durga. My wife and I were next to each other in the circle. Normally couples are separated to make sure they don't interfere with each other's experiences, but in this case the shaman let us sit next to each other, and we agreed not to interfere beforehand. At first we thought that there wouldn't have been any ayahuasca, but because we asked our shaman if she had it available that day, she made sure to get some. She was originally only planning to have a Bufo Alvarius ceremony. Ayahuasca told us that we were at the centre there because we brought together this gathering, and our energy was there to help some of the others who were on their own paths there as well. Ayahuasca also told her that this was her last life as a human on Earth, as well as for me. They told us that we had learnt all the lessons we needed to learn, and were coming home together after this life. Just as she started doubting everything Ayahuasca was telling her about being incarnations of Indian gods and this life being our last, a small black snake was touching her feet. She initially thought it was the DMT fucking with her, but just to make sure, she asked the shaman what was going on, and it really was a black snake. For anyone who doesn't know, black snakes are also a part of Kali and Shiva's mythological identity. In Hindu mythology, the snake primarily represents rebirth, death, and mortality. The shaman put the snake back on the grass, and it moved on to do whatever snakes do. The morning after ayahuasca, we get as ready as we can after a night of hardly enough sleep and meditate to center ourselves for the Bufo Alvarius experience. I go first, but didn't really feel my first hit. The smoke was less harsh than I expected it to be, and it was fairly easy to keep it in my lungs until the next hit. This remained true throughout all of this experience. After I took the second hit, I could start to feel my body vibrating slightly. Then, I took the third hit, and the vibration I felt quadrupled fast. I started to close my eyes when the shaman offered me a fourth one. I took the fourth hit, and kept it in my lungs as I closed my eyes and leaned back. I laid my arms beside myself, palms facing up, opening myself up to the experience. The time immediately started to dilute. The total trip lasted 15 minutes in this world, even though it only felt like 2 minutes at most after I got back. The shaman started shaking the maraca, and the sound of this quickly started to grow louder and louder. At the same time, it feels like my mind is collapsing into itself. Unlike what I've heard most people say about shooting off into a tunnel, it felt more like going within. It was like everything was collapsing into my mind and at the same time expanding into more and more white light. All I was saying to myself the whole time is, let go, let go, let go, let go. Everything became more and more overwhelming. The sound of the maraca kept getting louder and louder, and was coming from every direction, including from within myself. It was like infinite shaking maracas all around and within me, to the point where all the shaking merged into one really loud white noise. I remember being compelled to say, "Woohoo!" as I kept letting go of the idea that things were too overwhelming and let go of barrier after barrier. Every time my ego thought things were too overwhelming or tried to contain or judge the experience, I let go of it. Part of me realised because I am everything, nothing can be too overwhelming because it's all me. I believe that my interest in non-duality and previous learning about this topic had helped me immensely with letting go of judgment and ego in that very moment. Also, even though I wasn't aware of myself, the world, objective reality, etc. at this point, I was still aware of my body in the sense that I knew I had 2 legs and arms I could move. I could also feel myself making symmetrical arm movements. It was like I was swimming on my back in a pool. I could still feel the ground, and I wasn't judging anything. After some time of shedding layers, the idea of something overwhelming had disappeared, and there was a type of bliss present. Unlike other reports I've heard of feeling like God or intense love, ecstasy, etc., this was bliss without judgment, just pure tranquility and peace. More and more white nothingness became just more of this pure white void, yet was still there and without thought. I knew. I am. This was pure non-duality, just being, without judgment, without thought, without time, without ego. No feeling of being God, no concept of what God is, just being. This was the only point where I wasn't aware of my body. I could have been there for an eternity, but an eternity in a realm without time still just feels like a moment in a realm with time. When I came down from that, I could feel my arms and still felt the tranquil, peaceful bliss. I started hearing sounds around me. Slowly but surely, the directions of sounds around me came back, and I opened my eyes. I got up and threw up a little bit of saliva on the floor. It felt like a lot more was coming out than just the saliva though, but it felt really good getting it out. At the same time as this, everything was still vibrating intensely. Then, I just smelt the grass. It was such a strong smell, but I hadn't even noticed it until that point. My sense of smell was enhanced and the grass just grabbed my attention immediately. I grabbed the grass and brought my head to the ground to thank this world. It smelled so glorious. Then I just looked and took in the immense experience of the earth. I could see this insanely diverse and alive world right in front of me. The mundane made holy. Or maybe it was more me being made aware that everything mundane was always holy. I could see the ants and other small bugs, the tiny grains of sand, different types of grass, and it was just so beautiful. Infinity right in front of me, right around me, always. I'd never felt more alive than in this moment. I got up and walked over to my wife. As I was walking, everything was still vibrating, and I could feel the energy of people around me. My wife was having a little bit of a harder time, so I helped her through her experience. I did this for about 5 minutes. After this, I started talking to other people. I have minus 2.75 eyesight, and I didn't immediately realise it, but I could see things without my glasses. Not exactly as clear as with my glasses, but better than I should be able to. I noticed this as I was talking with someone, and the face started to fade in front of me when I realised I wasn't wearing my glasses at all. And that was that. I was surprised by how different my Bufo Alvarius experience was from what everyone described, but I was also really happy because I felt like I got exactly what I came for. Right now, I'm no longer overthinking anything, and I feel completely connected to this moment. I still feel like my sense of smell and taste is better than before, and there is the understanding of the eternal I amness. I gained a deeper trust in my experiences, and what ayahuasca told me before, as well as feeling less attached to my ego and other things of this material world. But also, at the same time, was appreciating and loving them more as they were. I'm going to do one more Bufo Alvarius 5-MeO-DMT experience before I leave Mexico, and I'm really looking forward to it. Much love. me.
Soulmate symbol. A ketamine, MDMA, mushrooms, ephedra, and nitrous oxide trip report. Posted by Particle16 to earwid.org, May 21st, 2007. New Year's Eve was coming on, and once again I was quite tired, exhausted, and had a headache that was buzzing through me. I had around 3 teaspoons of ephedra, drank it still quite warm, and proceeded to have a short nap. This lasted for about half an hour, and I felt fresher than I had throughout the whole day. 3 hours later, we arrived at our friend's place, and all proceeded to eat our small piles of magic mushrooms, a local coppertop species. Having issues eating the dry and mouldy tasting mushrooms on their own, we experimented with bits of popcorn and even mustard to make them come down easier. Not much was really eaten, and we had not eaten for around 6 hours prior. After about half an hour, the mushrooms hit, with a light discomfort and some indigestion. A light altered state was felt. Potentially our system still had a high build-up from the previous experience, with almost no closed-eye visuals at all. Open-eye visuals were also not present, but in the night, several trees had an added majesty and complexity added to them. A little euphoria was felt, and in general the experience felt more like a weak MDMA hit than the previous experiences with the same mushrooms. 1.5 hours after the mushrooms were taken, 1 ecstasy tablet was taken, which came on in about half an hour, just in time for New Year's. A great euphoria was felt, as New Year's hit and the fireworks were exploding. People could be heard in the houses nearby. A great feeling of togetherness was felt. Hugging friends was great, and we even indulged in a group hug, something unimaginable usually. Intimate moments and discussions with the girlfriend were also great. We were at a very high level of happiness and talked endlessly for a good hour. Our friends joined us on the large bed, and we all sat together and talked. There was definitely a vibe of fun and friendliness amongst us. No real come down was noted off either the mushrooms or the MDMA, as we still continued to have fun and talk together. But as it was getting late in the night, the party started separating a bit, and a few short casual bulbs of nos were taken. Now, around 5 AM, we retired to the bedroom, and split a half gram of ketamine crystals. These were crushed into a fine powder, and 4 lines were produced, which were inhaled into each nostril. Unlike previous times, no nose burn was noted, and very little residue entered the back of the throat. I had enough time to walk the 15 steps from the kitchen to the bedroom, and lie down before the K hit. The room changed hues very quickly, and its size and dimensions quickly changed. Within a little while I was on the way to the K-hole, and it began with a strong coming home and destruction of my own identity sort of feeling. I could feel my whole being torn apart into individual molecules of light, and my spirit moving inside of them. The spirit itself twisted back and forth momentarily, as I was rising far outside the room. It felt like a roller coaster going backwards and pulling me into space, and I saw the whole night sky and myself rising over the hills. I continued rising beyond the earth. I remember looking down and seeing my parents' house in the night. Soon, I was transported beyond planets and galaxies. Then the mind momentarily saw what I believed to have been God. It didn't see as much as just to be overwhelmed by a presence. An incredibly powerful, radiant swirling force that radiated goodness and warmth. Having come from a strong religious upbringing, I assumed it would be looking down at me unfavourably. But for some reason, the feeling that remained was this is the time you were meant to experience this. When I next found myself, I was in a purplish dark chamber, and my spirit twisted again.
I went from absolute knowledge to retardation, where everything goes very slow and unfolds like a timeless fractal. It was a strange feeling that I've had on ketamine before, which I assume is the apex of the experience as you rebound back into reality. My whole being was being spliced back together in this chamber. I was being put back together in small layers as bits of my own identity returned to me. The whole process seemed almost over. I started moving through the chamber, which more and more felt like an interdimensional space station. There were a variety of sections to this space, and I felt the presence of my friends who were in the physical house nearby to me. I saw them all as spirits, and came upon the realization that what I was witnessing was the spiritual dimension of our existence. Continuing upon this journey, I found a soul marked with a symbol. I have seen this symbol, that I call the soulmate symbol, on my very first ketamine trip, and it's an impossibly abstract vision to describe. Essentially, it is a merging of sex, love, combination, eternity, and a million different positive feelings all merged into one. I know that I have seen this symbol as a child, and somehow associated it to a variety of feelings. To try and describe it, one needs to think of old Indian Kama Sutra paintings, where the man and woman are combined together, but neither really look like man or woman, only in an abstract sense, almost cartoonish but different. On my first ketamine journey, I travelled beyond my body to the place where my partner lives, and once again on this journey, I had found her. It was almost like this space station had a line or endless row of souls, and having seen the symbol, my own spirit attached to hers. We moved further through the ship to a larger, bluer chamber, where she finally recognised who it was that had found her. We were lying in bed at the time, and it could be that we were both coming out of our trip and conversing with each other, though I must say, I have felt a telepathic link to people nearby on other ketamine trips. We slowly returned back to the room, and I saw her materialise before me. I lay there, quite drained, and filled with thoughts for a while. The dose, or purity, or application of the ketamine must have been considerably more powerful this time, as I felt it last a lot longer, and have a stronger buzzing, reverbing effect on my body, as I went to see my friend who had spent most of his trip in the backyard. Me and my buddy talked briefly about current world events, and I then slept deeply upon my return to the bedroom.
Timeless Moments in the Universe. A 2CB, LSD and MDA trip report by Raw, posted to earwid.org May 27th, 2022. On Saturday the previous week, my trip buddy Answers and I, Raw, decided to gather the next weekend to take a 2CB psychedelic adventure. Little did we know, it would become one of the most magical adventures of our lives, one of the most important adventures a human can ever experience. This is the unlocking of the mind, reaching a new level of consciousness. On Friday of the planned weekend, I take the day off work to cool down and meditate on the impending trip. Only a light meal is consumed earlier in the day, after picking up Answers from the light rail station. 5 PM. After our light meal, we begin preparing set and setting. We set up videos to watch on the TV, as well as music. 6:30 PM. We are still slightly affected by some earlier keef oil dabs. We realise that this relaxed state we're in is the perfect mindset to begin our journey. So we each take 25 milligrams of 2CB hydrobromic acid. We begin listening to and talking about music, a shared passion to pass the time. 7 PM, and the onset has happened for me, but not Answers. Since I'm getting restless, we decide to head outside and watch the city below from our backyard. 7:20. getting cold and shivery from the come up, so we head inside with the intention of grabbing clothes and the Keith oil dome plus nail setup, as well as a blanket so we can comfortably watch the sunset. 7:25. We get back inside, and this alone seems to kick us up both to a +2 on the Shulgin rating scale. 7:40. We head back outside with all the items and smoke more Keith oil while we watch the sunset and city as we slowly climb up to a full +3. We're both feeling warm with an amazing body high now. 8:35. The contrast between our 2CB warm bodies and the night are becoming too much, and we head back inside. We begin listening to music again and talk away the hours while also exploring my apartment. 9:45. Around this time, we are agreeing on how showers are a very serene experience while on a psychedelic. We go look at my shower to examine why this one in particular is so good. I commented that it's amazing how a psychedelic drug can reduce 2 grown men to standing in a shower with their clothes on, examining the surrounding environment. 11:50. Still talking, and on a +3 as well. We realise the peak is starting to fade, and our minds enter a state of clarity. I said something to Answers like, how could I feel any better than this? But he just sort of chuckled at me. Answers, being an experienced tripper, realised the mindset the 2CB had put us in was perfect to take our experience to the next level. We talked for a bit, and both agreed to take 300 to 350 micrograms of LSD in the form of 2 blotters each. We both get lost in the music while we work the blotters under our tongue. 12:30 AM. Consciousness begins to fade. 12:45. Time stops and we begin to enter a new world. The LSD has hit its own +3. We're both giggling on the couch while we're coming up. 1 AM. We break through to plateau. Beginning and end are happening at the same time. The gaps between thought as it rises and falls are an eternity or another open dimension for the mind to explore. I experienced my birth and my death, and saw the formation of thought itself within my own mind. This is a +4 experience. I have reached a state of nirvana now. Eckhart Tolle once wrote, "The secret to life is to die before you die. Once you've found death before it has found you, you have become immortal. Time is simply another dimension that our lives are projected across." Answers, being the experienced tripper, knows exactly what to do now that we have reached this state of clarity, this thoughtless awareness. We go into my room, and before we close the door, we tell ourselves that by closing it, all time will stop and we will be in this room forever. Every time we leave the room will be a new adventure entirely. Beyond this, there is no accurate timeline until later in the experience. We're not sure on the exact order of these events in reality. In our world, this entire experience was happening without regard to the flow of time whatsoever. While in the separate timeless dimension within my bedroom, we listen to music, explore the depths of our own consciousness, and look at art. We spend time trying to describe our fantasies to one another. My dog has to go outside, so we go outside with him. Colours are very intense and plants are full of life, and I'm connecting with my dog in ways I never imagined possible. The sun is rising, so we decide to take some chairs outside and watch the day come on. My dog is running around, playing while we enjoy the trees. We can hear the life in every single bird chirp, and feel the life in every living thing surrounding us. At some point, once the LSD effect's starting to come off peak, we decided to each take 50 milligrams of MDA. After coming up on this, the experience just turned to pure bliss. The mind was still unlocked, but now also more at peace with what is happening. Once peaking on the MDA, I decided to take a shower. It was the most serene shower I have ever taken. It felt like all the bad was washing away with it. I realise I have died, and I'm able to rebuild myself into the person I desire myself to be. I may come down off the drug, but I'll never come down from the experience it gave me. I decide to invite a good friend over who I know I need here during this divine transformation. He is someone I need around me while I'm rebuilding myself from the ground up. We begin to use glow sticks as a light source, to stimulate the closed eye visuals, which becomes extremely intense. 11:50 AM. We are outside when my friend shows up, still on the plateau. We head inside and talk a bit before heading outside for our last outdoor adventure. 12:15 PM. We head outside again to grab the mail and enjoy nature for one last time. 3:15. We watch Finding Nemo, but I'm not really paying attention. I'm dwelling on what this new way of thinking means to me, and how I know I will never be the same person from this day forward. I have reached an internal peace, and have become immortal within my own realm of thought. I drift off to sleep at some point. 7 PM. We wake up, and I am no longer in that space between thought. My other friend left while we were asleep. I have rejoined the flow of time. I drive Answers back to the light rail station and invite some good friends over so I can share my experience with them. To this day, I have never come down off the trip. I am now able to meditate at any time and reach that point in time between thoughts. I have undergone the quintessential divine transformation in my own way. I have died before death came to me.
The Dead Man's Dream, a 25I NBOME and 25C NBOME trip report by a dreamer, posted to earwid.org August 10th, 2016. This experience is by far the most profound experience I've ever had. I consider myself a fairly seasoned psychonaut, and have imbibed many a mind-altering substance in my time. DMT, DPT, LSD, most of the 2C series, mushrooms, MXE, ketamine, etc. But nothing I have ever done in the past even comes close to what happened to me this night. I'd recently acquired some 25I NBOME and 25C NBOME gel tabs, with a fairly high dose in each, 1.5mg 25I and 0.8mg 25C. I went outside and smoked a bowl with a friend and showed them my newly acquired magical gummy worms. I wasn't entirely set on trying it that night, but just kind of said, well, why not? So, due to prior experiences with 25 NBOME, 1.5mg gave me a fairly good yet somewhat underwhelming experience. I decided to double it this time, and at about 10:45 stuck 2 of the gel tabs under my upper lip and waited for the fun to begin, which, I must say, did not take long. 11. Mouth is mostly numb and that god-awful taste remains. Breathing feels strange. The first signs of psychedelia manifest. A general feeling of strangeness takes me. 11:15. Feelings of strangeness continue. Slight trails forming now. 11:30. Closed eye visuals really kicking in. Objects begin breathing and the world begins taking on a purple hue. 11:45. Cottonmouth from the weed earlier combined with the horrid taste of the research chemicals is getting annoying now. My walking is mostly unhindered into the kitchen to get a glass of water. At 11:47ish, I'm walking back to the living room to get on the laptop and listen to music, when things start getting downright crazy. It feels as if I'm on a boat in a storm. Everything is moving around, the walls and floor begin rippling. I have to hold myself up along the wall to make it to the couch. I go to put on some music, but find it somewhat difficult as the keyboard appears to be moving around and changing sizes. I finally succeed in getting music started. Bad idea, the noise is actually quite weird. I somehow start to become mesmerised by it, and it becomes less terrifying over time. I attempt to look stuff up on the internet, but I don't really know why, because I can barely even read the screen at this point. At 12, I feel unbelievably good, so damn happy to be honest. I'm more used to the hallucinations now, and seem to have regained my balance. I realise I forgot my water in the kitchen and decide to go get it. I get halfway there and decide it would also be a good time to go smoke a bowl and go back to get the weed and my phone so I can listen to music whilst burning one. Stop halfway to the kitchen again and play with the cat. At this point, I pretty much lose my ability to tell time at all. I stand by the window and look for whatever it is that my cat is staring at. As I stand there, I realise I have no idea how long I've even been standing there in the first place, or how long ago it was that I got up to get my glass of water. Things even seem to start repeating themselves.
I walk towards the kitchen to get water. I'm back at the window. Again, I walk to get my water. Back at the window. What the fuck is going on? I finally managed to make it to the kitchen and realise I'm way too far gone to even attempt to burn something so close to my face. So I decide to nix the weed smoking idea. I recall certain foods tasting amazing while on 25i, so I decide to eat some fruit instead. I get some kiwi out of the refrigerator and sit down on the floor to eat it because, yeah, fuck chairs. Things seem to repeat again. I get the kiwi out of the refrigerator, I sit down, it repeats again. I finish the kiwi and go to wash my hands. After washing my hands, I get engrossed watching the patterns forming on the floor tiles. I then again zone out and forget how long I've actually been standing there. I walk back to the couch and get on the laptop. I seem to have conquered my inability to read. I start looking at Facebook and high strangeness begins anew. A massive sense of deja vu washes over me. I remember all of this. I actually saw these posts months ago. The last time I did 25IMBOME, I saw these exact same posts. As I scroll down the page, I can predict the next post before I get to them. For the second time now, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. So the hallucinations come back en masse now. The computer seems as if it's some alien machine. Everything starts warping around, it's very hard to focus now. Purple and gold vines and snakes start growing out of the ceiling. I decide to make an attempt to listen to music again. I get my headphones out of my pocket, but cannot unravel them. Something crunches between my fingers, and a small insect walks up my arm. Then, there's thousands of them. The buzzing. Oh god, the buzzing. It's just a drug, they're not real. The buzzing then dissipates, and the insects are gone. I look around, and the vines are still there swinging about though. I see a ring of people around me. I can't see them right in front of me, they seem to be in my peripheral vision. They look like ghosts. There's a ring of ghosts standing around me chanting. Their incantations fall on deaf ears. I look at my hands and a scorpion crawls out of one and walks up my arm, across my chest, down my other arm, and finally into the other hand. Strange. Very, very strange. I realise I forgot my damn water again, and try to make it back to the kitchen. This time the journey is fraught with obstacles. The fact the obstacles aren't actually there is only a minor concern. The people sitting on my kitchen table seem friendly enough. I cannot make out the language they are speaking at all. I offer them some fruit, and they disappear. Oh, too bad. It's good fruit, they're missing out. Holy shit, I just offered real fruit to imaginary people. I get my water and go back to the couch, when a feeling of dread washes over me. Reality seems to be breaking all around me. More things repeat, and it would appear that I'm firmly stuck in a loop. The TV show that is on now doesn't seem to be conducive to having a good trip. I try to change the channel, but just cannot figure out how to make the remote work. I think I should just try and go to bed. I make it as far as the laundry room and get lost in the darkness. Abort. Mission failure. I cannot make it to the bedroom. I must go back the way I came. The return journey is perilous. When I last came through here, there was light abound, but now it is gone, and only a faint glimmer coming from the television I couldn't succeed in turning off exists. I return to the couch and lie down there. The feeling of dread remains. What is it that I'm afraid of? I fade in and out. The television seems to be repeating itself again. I'm sitting with my phone in my hand. When did I sit up? When did I get my phone? The man on the television has a phone as well. He sends a text. I get a text. It's from the guy on TV. Then the world explodes. I'm sitting with my phone in my hand. When did I sit up? When did I get my phone? The man on the television has a phone as well. He sends a text. I get a text. It's from the guy on TV. Nah, wait, didn't this just happen? I look out the window. Something streaks across the sky. The world explodes. I'm now sitting with my phone in my hand. When did I sit up? When did I get my phone? The man on the television has a phone as well. He sends a text. I get a text. It's from the guy on TV. Nah, not again. Bang. I'm now curled up on the couch. What just happened to me? I recall explosions, and the remote is lying on the floor now, broken, covered in blood. There is smoke everywhere, burning, everything's burning. I'm back on the couch. The remote is on the arm of the couch, and now the third. What the fuck is going on? Walk to the front door and look outside. Things seem to be flipping from the psychedelic amazing world to the, exploded world. I look back to the couch and the remote is on the floor broken again, when a second later it is back on the arm unscathed. Fuck this. I'm lying back down. I'll deal with the possibly broken remote tomorrow. So I'm lying on the couch again, and various visions of my demise flash before me. A sense of panic washes over me. That last one felt very real. I am lying on a road. Pain everywhere. I'm broken, I'm bleeding, I'm dying. Certain sounds start to make sense. What I recognised as snores a moment ago is actually the sound of the diesel engine of an ambulance. The paramedic stands over me, saying, "We're losing him," he says as the whine of a defibrillator fills my ears. My breaths come on rapidly now, and I feel like I'm having a seizure of sorts, when time slows to a crawl. Everything starts to reverse. The paramedic stands and backs away, the ambulance backs away, a semi backs away as I stand. I reverse back through a broken window into my house. A knife is sticking out of my midsection. I lower myself to the floor. The knife is in my hand as I rise awkwardly. In reverse, I walk back to the counter and my finger is lying on the cutting board along with a piece of fruit. I lower my hand and the finger attaches back onto its proper place. I put the knife back into the block. So now everything moves forward again. I get the knife out of the block. While cutting the fruit, I slip and take off a finger. Shock overwhelms me. Why the fuck am I cutting something up while this high? I slip on some blood and fall onto the floor. The knife stabs into my stomach. No. Why? Not now. I manage to make it to my feet and stumble forwards. I fall forwards and smash through the window. Rising again, I stumble forwards, ever forwards, and I am now on the road. I turn in time to see the lights and hear the horn. The truck hits me. I'm lying on the road, pain everywhere. The sprinkler across the street kicks on. The water combining with the first light of dawn makes an astoundingly beautiful rainbow when an ambulance pulls up. "We're losing him," a paramedic says as he stands over me. The words fade out as a familiar whine fills my ears. Again, in reverse, and forwards. The cycle repeats several times, when a realization grips me. All of this, everything, is all just the final sparks of a brain on the brink of death. Perception of time stretches to infinity. My whole life is occurring in the blink of a dying eye. The last time the defibrillator is brought to my chest, I feel a jolt. I'm lying on the couch. It's still dark outside. I check my phone. 3:45 a.m. For the fourth and final time, what the fuck is going on? At that point, I decided to go to bed. I was still tripping way too hard to actually sleep, so I just listened to some music and waited for daylight. I still felt quite strange most of the day, with some slight hallucinations remaining as late as 10:30 that very night. That experience has certainly stuck with me. I tried the same combo a while later, and the same feeling of dread got me once again. As the experience started to play out again, I could hear the engines roaring. I could feel the road and the pain. Thankfully though, that time, I didn't get caught in a loop, and I actually managed to break out of it and watch a movie instead of, dying repeatedly, forever and ever. the master plan. An MDMA, Salvia divinorum, 5-MeO-DMT, nitrous oxide and cannabis trip report by 138. Posted at earwid.org, January 28, 2004. First of all, I must say that I'm a well-rounded psychonaut with many profound experiences in my bag. Having done all these substances on several different occasions singly, and done a few of them in combinations, I was ready for this catapulting combination of substances. Being the only day that I didn't have 1,000 things going on this spring break, my friend and I decided to have a blowout blast from the future while dragging along the past. It was a normal weekday with nothing to do except reach alternate dimensions. We'd gotten a friend to hook up my friend C and myself with 5 red smiley face MDMA pills that had these little white blotches on them. We'd initially planned on starting our experience at midnight so the timing would be easy, but we ended up running about 15 minutes behind schedule. Upon our nearing home, about 15 minutes away from our doorstep, C and I dropped one pill at 12:15, and this was where the night had begun. At 0 hours, C and I downed one MDMA pill each on the car ride home. 14 minutes in, C and I arrive at my house. 35 minutes and I'm starting to feel the rise of serotonin throughout my body, as is C. At 1 hour, C and I each down one more MDMA pill, just as our first pills are starting to kick in fully. An hour and 30 in, being the potheads that we are, we get the urge to smoke a bowl of high-grade cannabis, and then did just that. Didn't do much, however, but whatever, all is good. 2 hours and 25 minutes in. We're having deep introspection upon ourselves with great joy. We decide to split the last MDMA pill we had. We split the red smiley in half with a razor blade. Half of the pill, each down the hatch. Now, this is where the experience turns from 2 friends having fun rolling into a mesmerizing spiritual rebirth of cosmic proportions. The addition of short and fast-acting, powerful hallucinogens. 2 hours and 40 minutes in, we decide to add a more spiritual twist to the experience with the scientific mystery that is salvia. Feeling good, we decide to go for a large dose. 3 bowls of salvia each smoked out of a bong with no water in it. The usual irregular herbal taste was quite present, but had no effect on us until the start of my 3rd bowl full of the salvia leaves. The strangely familiar sideways gravity of salvia was applied to my body upon exhaling the 3rd bowl. Then nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I got this strange pressure in my head that shot down my back as if a spear had been jammed down my spine, and it then began twisting me around this centre as if I was in an office chair. I then started to hear this sound that sounded like the breeze on a really windy day. And with this natural wind sound came the birth of tricoloured ivy that started growing out of the walls. These red, green and blue ivy vines, worm-like, weren't like patterns projected onto the wall. They literally grew out of the wall in a horizontal manner, braiding like the tentacles in the movie Evolution. This experience was strangely different than salvia alone. It even started to scare me as the salvia grabbed my body, twisting it harder and harder. As soon as the fear took over, I reached an incredibly peaceful state and realized how we evolved, and that we are cellular-based creatures like plants. Once the peak was over, I looked at my friend and saw myself as a friend from a past. An alternate dimension, déjà vu if you will. It snapped into and out of my head just as quick as I handed my friend a lighter, like the person who I became had done to me a year earlier. At 2 hours and 50 minutes, I'm now at a peaceful state with the effects of salvia present. So, we decide to mix in some 5-MeO-DMT with it, which in my opinion is one of the best things to do while under the influence of MDMA. I took out my tinfoil spoon and a cone straw made of paper, and we each freebased 5 milligrams of the chemical. The loss of ego was taken a lot more lightly than it normally is, but we immediately became lost in reality. Observing it still, but having no idea what the hell was actually going on. There was this incredible tingling feeling alongside this. Felt like a 9-volt battery to the tongue, but throughout my whole body instead. And as this happened, just then, the visuals exploded. Geometric fractal patterns started projecting onto the wall like linear Cheshire cats from Alice in Wonderland that inverted themselves outward. They were like those water tubes that are like stretched out donuts. My hands started to sweat a little bit, so I drank some water. C then joked that all we needed now was a cartridge of nitrous to take things up a bit. And I, not thinking in the moment, said fuck it, let's do 2. 2 hours and 53 minutes in, and C said that he was too obliterated to do a nitrous at the moment. I took the words of Jim Morrison, I believe in a prolonged arrangement of the senses to achieve the unknown, into play. I noticed the Doors' The End happened to be playing as I inhaled the first balloon, but forgot what was playing by the time I was inhaling the second one. Sitting on the couch in my living room, I was able to see the whole apartment as I exhaled the nitrous. A few seconds later, and I became numb to the world, only feeling as if I was an entity barely knowing what was going on. The world morphed into another dimension containing a crazy-ass black and red waving checkerboard pattern of diamonds. This took my depth perception and melded it to that pattern. Then, I had the most profound experience of my life. Instead of hearing the normal ringing sounds that nitrous yields, I heard a demonic laugh. This was not of my voice, nor C's, and after this, I then yelled out the words in the same demonic voice.
You stupid kids, you have no idea what is going on.
This irked the hell out of me. I didn't tell myself to say this. It just came out automatically. I then felt as if I was an old man who was about to die. I turned to my right and looked at C as if I'd just seen a ghost. But it was I who felt like a ghost, as I yelled out, "Holy shit!" and stared at him in anticipation as the Doors' The End was coming to its peak. I could feel each heartbeat as if it was my last, while staring blankly into my friend's eyes as if looking at his soul. I felt the game world's existence in all of its actuality, feeling as if I'd just figured out the answer to the paradox that is life and death, the so-called master plan. The music subsided at the same time the nitrous had, returning me to the normal ecstasy feeling strapped with the most profound experience of my entire life. I remember thinking about what had just happened and hearing the words, well, who's getting the last laugh now? I basically just sat there in awe until 4:18, when I got the idea to smoke some weed. 4 hours and 5 minutes in, whilst puffing on a joint of low-grade cannabis and sipping on a beer, I came up with the philosophy that you can't define something inside of itself, so the only way to define life is to die. But since I don't want to do that just yet, I came up with the living philosophy that you haven't lived until you stare death right in the face. In complete and utter awe of what had happened in the past 4 hours, I drank one more beer and discussed the experiences with my good friend C, who was there with me the whole time. At 6:41 AM, 6 hours and 26 minutes after first ingesting the MDMA, I finish a final beer and smoke a bowl of pot. And boom, I was out like a light. This experience was the greatest thing that I have ever felt and observed. I've had many deeply spiritual experiences before with a wide range of substances, like my first shroom trip or my last Foxy trip, but this was by far the best. Definitely fun, definitely insightful, and I definitely learned a lot about myself and the world. I wouldn't have traded anything in the world for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I must say to you all, remember, if you're going to do anything like this, please, safety first. The Maelstrom. A ketamine, 25I, NBOMe, and 25C NBOME trip report by Man from Chan Chan, posted to earwid.org April 22nd, 2013. Hi there. I'd like to relate quite a profound experience that I had yesterday. Over my long years of experimentation, I'm pretty experienced with the whole panoply of psychedelics. I consider myself well grounded and confident exploring hyperspace in all its forms. I'd recently begun exploring 25I and 25C NBOME. I had some good blotter tabs from a trusted source, and my buccal experiences, of each individually, were pleasing and encouraged me to push further on. So, insufflation beckoned. The first issue was how to get the substances out of the blotter and into powder form. The 25I was at 1,200 micrograms, and the 25C at 800 micrograms. I figured any extraction would not be 100% efficient, so I felt extracting one whole tab of each would yield enough for a good trip in combination. As handling 2 milligrams of material was likely to provide a challenge, I hit upon the inspired, reckless idea of combining some ketamine with the solution to provide a more manageable substrate. My aim with this was to progress from a nice vibrant K-hole into a focused hyperspace, mediated by the dissociative effects of the K. Surely I can't be the only person in the world who thinks like this sometimes. So, to about 1 tablespoon of room temperature vodka in a small jar, I added 1 tab each of 25I and 25C. I capped the jar, agitated it periodically, and left it to stand on a warm radiator for about 2 hours. I used tweezers to fold and squeeze the tabs out before discarding them, and then added my usual holing dose of 200 milligrams of ketamine, again from a good known source. This dissolved easily, and I tipped the solution out into a saucer to evaporate, back on the radiator. This was good to go after a further hour. It was just after lunch, a cold bright day, and a nice view of the garden lay behind our large windows. I had the house to myself for the next 6 hours or so. I always prefer tripping alone, and never felt the need or inclination for a sitter, but that's just me. I set up a playlist in iTunes, over Airport to my hi-fi. All was good, and I hoovered up the whole amount of powder in 2 fat lines, and settled back on the couch under a blanket. To be honest, I struggled to recall any details of the whole, other than it was very pleasant and felt great. I doubt it was substantially affected by the additives, and have the feeling they were really only just kicking as the whole drew towards a conclusion. So, synergy was limited up to that point. As I came out of the hole with some good breaths like a diver surfacing, it rapidly became apparent that I wasn't in Kansas anymore. My surroundings seemed essentially the same whether my eyes were closed or open. I could still make out the forms of things and the room and views around me, and in retrospect, this was probably a result of the post-K afterglow sedation, which kept me reasonably relaxed and in simple awe of things, and the fact that M-bombs hadn't quite reached full intensity. But a short while afterwards, it felt like my brain had a Hiroshima moment. A blinding whiteness which faded to reveal that everything, and I mean every single atom I could see, was plastered around me in a swirling 2D fractal soup. Absolutely no depth or perspective to anything. My outstretched hand was like a big pink cactus painted into the background beyond, like Van Gogh himself was working directly across my retina in a frenzied blur. This was when I first felt a shuddering sense of panic, struggling to place myself in time, space, or context. I wondered if this was how flies see the world through their compound eyes. Millions of tiny lenses, refracting everything into neat, swirling, diamond-shaped pixels. Looking back and not having prior experience of it, I realised this was what ego death actually was. Not a death as such, with some imaginary demon killing you, with a complete unravelling of all of the many strands which make up me, or I. I struggled to recall what I had done, and where I actually was, and how I was going to proceed. The possibility that this 2D Paper Mario world of boiling fractal diamonds was now going to be my home for who knows how long was really quite hellish. I grabbed my phone, but it was simply a blue blob. I could no more make out an icon than I could normally see the nucleus of an atom in a piece of chess.
The landline handset was similarly useless. The music seemed to have gotten stuck. Impossible since it was just a streaming file, but I had to turn it off. I couldn't use my phone to control the source, so I stabbed wildly at the invisible black buttons on my black amplifier until silence appeared. I felt a pang of anguish that this was how we people of today will end our lives, impotently flailing at buttons we can no longer see or understand, nothing working anymore, left all alone in silence. I'd cut all my ropes, and now had no means of climbing out of the void I was now in. I began to speak, calling myself by my name at first, saying, "Pull yourself together, man, this is where you are, and you need to get through it, no matter what." My voice was the one sensory input which was vaguely normal, and that helped a lot. It seemed to take about 15 minutes to move 2 yards from one seat to another, feeling my way blindly as I did so. I took some deep breaths, and the pangs of isolation and self-pity had eased a little. I craved to be outdoors, to hit the natural reset, but I got as far as the door and thought, well, I can't go out there. If the neighbours see me, it's going to be game over. I longed for a hug or a friendly voice, but because of the phone issues, I knew this was an impossibility, which hurt a lot. I remembered I had locked the cat in the next room prior to my experience. I went to let her in, and I heard the sound of her, but she was just an invisible, painterly blur amongst the many others as she shot into the room, meowing. Cats always know when you're up to stuff, in my experience. Looking back, I'm annoyed I didn't make more constructive use of my first ego death. But in truth, I think the first experience of it is so overwhelming, bordering on terrifying, that unless you've consciously planned what to do in that event, and meditated accordingly, you're over the falls without so much as a barrel to protect you before you know it. To have every frame of reference cut abruptly away, and my inner voice, co-pilot, struggling to even speak, was profoundly isolating and unsettling. I definitely wondered if I had gone too far, done some irreversible damage, and or become permanently insane. At no point did I cry, but I felt I easily could have done. I felt I had lost lots of important things and might not get them back. I'd noticed the empathogenic qualities of 25I before, 25C not nearly so much. It seemed to enable forgotten memories to surface in a vague but warm and non-threatening way. But now these memories were only of what I was, and it was by no means clear that I would easily get back to that state. And that made me feel sad, and somewhat stupid. I'd also noticed the time-stretching powers of 25I previously. It seemed to distort time, to allow more thoughts, images to unravel and be processed. This was fine with music playing, acting as a metronome, but in silence it was beginning to feel quite disturbing. I wondered more than once whether time would actually come to a complete stop, and I'd be trapped in a single insane moment forever. The idea of my girlfriend coming home in 4 hours' time seemed like several millennia away. I resolved to try and get some music on, and first I tried the radio next door, but that was the news, and all I got was, "Police are looking, police are looking, police are looking." A fragment of a report chopped up and reverbed to death. Thanks 25C. The audio distortion is a peculiar characteristic of that one. Groping wildly around my hi-fi, I managed to hit play on the CD deck. No idea what was loaded. And after what seemed like about 6 months, I stumbled across the correct button on the amp to allow the sound to issue forth. In the end, it turned out to be Matthew Dear, Body Language Mix. A great, deep set, but some uncomfortably vivid, slurpy, sexy bodily noises in there. Well, I guess they would have to do. I had by now managed to locate the cat, although she seemed reluctant to get close to me. I tried to get in a lotus position but couldn't quite, so sat cross-legged and looked out to the garden and sky. For the first time in what was probably 2+ hours since emerging from the hole, I got the first glimmer that maybe, just maybe, things might be starting to slow down. I could get more thoughts together. I felt I was slowly starting to return to the situation. I wanted to celebrate with a cigarette, but that wouldn't be possible. I couldn't go outside, and we can't smoke indoors, lease, etc. And besides, I certainly didn't trust myself to operate fire yet. I settled on a drink, with a pee first. Going upstairs, I felt the elves were with me, saying I'd be okay. They'd stick right alongside me, although this was not without a hint of menace. Trying to aim for the bowl was next to futile. I blindly threw some towels on the floor to minimize the inevitable. Pouring a drink, I had no idea whether it was a thimble or a bucket of vodka I got into the glass, even though I crouched down to eyeball it. The taste was familiar and comforting, like the first signpost on the road back from nowhere to here. More breathing, more pacing, more things coming back into focus, but the phone still useless. I felt like a diver who had been tipped into the breaking surf by a coral reef. Although initially blind and completely disorientated, at least I had a handhold now, and I could start to see what was actually swirling around me. Some perspective was returning to things, and the sinister flatness of everything was receding. I'd say it was close to the 4-hour mark before I could finally, just about, text my girlfriend to say I couldn't wait to see her. That felt like a big and long overdue accomplishment. She got back at about T+5 hours, and everything was still very much alive but manageable, and I could interact fairly normally with her, as I began to explain the day's events. The evening settled in, and I was finally ready to go to bed at about 2 AM, where I slept a very, very deep and blissful sleep. Here are some observations. Number 1. Of a heck of a lot of experiences, this one stands out as my fear and loathing one. Would I try the exact same combo again? No way. The experience of being delivered into the M-bomb space from the K-hole on rails was profoundly unsettling. 2. I wonder whether pre-dosing with a therapeutic dose of MDMA, at around 100 milligrams, might have helped ease the integration of the MBOMA experience and lessen the anxiety. 3. Although I wouldn't recreate the same initial combo, I would consider using methoxetamine, MXE, as a base. This does integrate the N-bomb experience well, in my and others' experience. I could imagine mixing 100 milligrams of MXE with 1 tab of each, and then consuming 50 milligrams of the resulting product, so half total MBOME load, that might be about right for me to have a very rich experience, with the option to bump it up further if necessary. 4. Thanks to 25i's fairly mechanical mode of action, this episode was largely uncoloured by malign feelings that can sometimes arise on DMT and LSD. I didn't feel there was any intelligence, friendly, hostile or other at work, and this was a major relief in hindsight, given the overall intensity of the experience. Such anxiety as I experienced was solely as a result of aspects of my consciousness being cleanly obliterated for a period. 5. My fears about the efficiency of the extraction process were clearly unfounded. I definitely felt I was on the receiving end of the full 2 mg NVOMe compounds. 6. I took a Valium once, unconnected to psychedelic adventures, and loathed it. So I don't even have any benzos in the house and wouldn't have been able to find them safely even if I had. If somebody had appeared to offer me one at the peak, would I have taken it? Possibly, although I still feel they are best reserved for catastrophic, delusional episodes, which I have until now avoided mercifully. So I think I would have still preferred to ride it out, rather than bail, but it's the closest I have come to wishing I had a stop button in my experiences so far. 7. Trying to cross the bridge from fun, recreational trips into profound experiences needs more preparation on my part. And finally, number 8. An old-fashioned cassette deck preloaded with an ambient tape would make a useful backup for when the shiny stuff becomes an unreachable abstraction.
The Doom Train, a 25i NBOME and Salvia Divinorum trip report by M, posted to earwid.org March 8, 2018. Well into a pretty heavy 25i NBOME trip, I decided to
to take a teensy, tiny little hit of 25x salvia that was bestowed upon me through some fortune. Exhaling, I laid back and felt all the oncomings of this. Immediately I noticed the intense, sharp geometric and orderly visuals of the N-bomb beginning to morph and round off at the edges, becoming more animated, organic and fluid, and went much further in depth. There was a real life and meaning to it now, aside from pretty colours and shapes. Along with this, I felt the presence of someone, or more than one maybe. Some unseen hand unfolding and revealing various pages of this reality for me. It was like a circus joker figure-esque thing, in the corners of my perception, manipulating the world in front of me, turning the pages. I started feeling I was in a great festival of life in all the universe. From out of the corners of my perception, I felt the warm company of others dancing, morphing and frolicking around me. There was a very feminine presence to it all, the soul of womanly things surrounding me, welcoming me to this world. I giggled and felt joyous. I sat in this experience not feeling too out of place, as otherworldly as it all seemed. Slowly, the salvia wore off and I was back into my N-bomb world. Now, the N-bomb world didn't seem so intense or deep as I'd thought, compared to this little taste of salvia world. I just had my first trip within a trip. Then, I decided to take a normal hit and hold it in for a good time. Now, I don't know what I was expecting, but this was beyond anything I've ever thought possible as a state of being. Being conscious and witnessing what I did will forever have a lasting impact on my life. So this is my interpretation, putting this to words to the best of my ability, which oddly won't be that difficult compared to trying to describe, say, LSD or mushroom trips. Exhale. Now I'm expecting something similar to what I just felt earlier, but with a little more zing, so to speak. God, I was wrong. So very wrong. Time freezes and I realise something very big is about to happen. Very big. Oh no, I thought to myself. Too much? Oh, I knew it, this was it. Titanic was about to hit the iceberg. My perception of sound went to flat silence, and all I heard or sensed was this massive machine approaching from far, far away. And by massive, I mean Unicron planet-devouring massive. Just being aware of it, so big, felt like it sucked all the air out of the room. The vacuum created on a beach before a tsunami. A low rumbling was felt. It rumbled with the force of a great machine that I could feel shaking me. The shaking felt physically real. It approached from the distance, making whirring and whizzing noises here and there. It was so big. I could feel this machine was sweeping a route like a Zamboni or lawnmower. It got extremely close, then whirred off along its path into the great distance, then coming back in a swelling ferocity. To and fro it went. Luckily, I was a little prepped for this from reading some great stories of salvia experiences, and I realised that I was about to be shredded up once the machine made its pass over me. But still, reading about it simply cannot prepare you. I waited, somewhat afraid now, only frightened at how truly serious and big this actually felt. What was it going to do to me? This machine was mowing the lawn around my mind, and it would soon mow over my entire mind. Everything in front of me, in my physical space, began to push towards me, clutter up like an invisible hand was mashing my room into me. I stared at one spot on my wall by a speaker and a can of beer sitting on top of it, and just waited for it. Felt this machine shredding right past me. I was afraid to look anywhere else, and just waited for it to hit me. Then my turn came. It unzipped the seams of my reality. I saw the cracks open up in the walls and little faces peering back from behind the scenes. The can of beer and speaker became an intersect of where this machine had sliced through, and reality peeled back from floor to ceiling. It was like a knife tearing open a curtain. There were cuts and slashes all over my walls. It was so vivid, just like seeing a knife tearing through a curtain, but with more fluidity than clothiness. The beer can had a face now like a cartoon. It was alive. All the objects and anything near these torn edges had faces and life to it. little cartoon characters of sorts. I literally saw the fabric of reality rip open and the borders around and in it come to life. And when I looked into the other side, it was almost like, oops, you weren't supposed to see that. No data written here yet. I wasn't sure, but looking into or out of my room, I saw these puppeteers holding my room together. Chameleon-like, camouflaged ninja people posed and stretched out on all sides of the walls and corners, holding it together in disguise, a bit like they were supporting a front or a hoax. When I noticed them, they shapeshifted and acrobated themselves elsewhere, and the room just disappeared. This was a very brief and bizarre moment, and I had no sense of inside or outside. Was I looking in at this, or was I looking out? It seemed like I was seeing the universe's safeguard of experiencing technical difficulties. Be back with you shortly, while the rest of the program had loaded up. Looking back at this specific part though, I think I was just experiencing a space beyond my 3 dimensions and couldn't quite come to terms with what it was. I was witnessing the architect of these constructs move about, a bit like I was backstage watching the acts play out. The shredding continued, or so I thought, but then it was just gone suddenly. I was expecting it to get stronger and more intense, but it leveled off and faded out peacefully. Going back a sec, it's important to note, during this shredding phenomena, I could feel a very unique but distinct burning sensation on all the edges this machine was cutting, like open wounds. It felt like a fire to me, but not painful, just a fiery feeling in evenly cut folds. Then I realized that was it. I'm in Salvia world now, all in. It wasn't that bad after all. It was just that serious impending onset of something huge about to happen that took me aback. But once I was there, I felt okay. I also felt taxed, like I'd reached the top of a mountain after a strenuous climb. I lay at the peak, exhausted and overwhelmed. I can't really describe much of the rest. I just saw all of these fantastic inner workings of the nature of reality, all the little souls and people that work all the magic like a circus act. These creatures were very clown-like, nimble, cartwheeling and flipping and flowing here and there. I couldn't quite keep up. They seemed shadowy and elusive. I got a glimpse of all this, and then the high receded. The entire time I just kept saying, wow, oh my god, to myself over and over. I had no idea. Wow. I didn't know it could be this big. At this point, I was just in too much awe to try to make sense of anything. I was just happy to know I got through it all. I called this strong force a machine, mainly because of the sounds and vibrations I was getting from it. It was like a hedge clipper or buzzsaw. It had some very calculated and mechanized notions to it. But at the same time, it was just simply a huge surging force of energy. It was a very defining threshold between realities. One would have to actually experience it to understand how truly massive it feels. It also seemed finite though. I could sense its largeness, which meant it had a size, right? Well, maybe for another time. I know a lot of higher level trips describe being shot out or blasted out into space, whatever decorative words you choose. But for me personally, it felt like it all came to me. I didn't go anywhere. I was here the whole time. But the rest of it blasted into me, or my space I know as reality. Truly one of the most amazing experiences in my life so far. Flying ointment and having visions. A belladonna, datura, mandrake, valerian and cinquefoil trip report by Grimir Ineir Drenga. Posted to earwid.org November 16th, 2020. As a practicing occultist very interested in the old-fashioned traditional ideas of witchcraft, as well as primitive shamanism, the Solanaceae family of plants, belladonna, henbane, datura, mandrake, etc., have held a strong interest for me for quite some time. The legends of witches and warlocks lathering themselves with the flying ointment and having visions of flying to Mount Brocken to hold these wild revelries and orgiastic rites of demons or the devil himself are widely known and recounted vividly in many medieval witch hunters' documents. I did extensive research before I finally decided to order some belladonna and datura off the internet. I looked at a wide variety of articles and experience reports to try and get a general idea of what was a safe psychoactive dose, as opposed to what was a deadly one. After I felt confident and knew what I was doing, I ordered some witch's flying ointment, as well as some belladonna plant matter, as well as 2 ounces of datura. The datura was all parts of the plant: stems, leaves, flowers, and some seeds. The flying ointment contained belladonna as well as mandrake, valerian, and cinquefoil. First night. When I finally received these items in the mail, I waited until the evening and first lathered a moderate-sized dab onto my temples, wrists, the back of my neck, and also my chest, as recommended by the seller. After about half hour, I began to feel slight effects coming on. The first sign, as many have said before, was the drying out of the throat, the feeling of thirst which drinking cannot quench. Secondly, my vision began to become warped. After about an hour, nothing more happened, so I realised it not had been a high enough dose to experience the psychoactive effects I was after. I had a calming, sedative sensation instead. My heart felt warm, and I looked in the mirror and found my pupils were slightly dilated, but nothing more than that so far. I take it upon myself to pinch a small amount of the belladonna and 2 datura leaves, making hot tea out of them. I waited 20 minutes for it to cool and drank all of it down. In all honesty, it didn't actually taste that bad at all, just planty like a lot of herbal teas are. About 45 minutes later, some mild psychoactive effects began to kick in. The effects I got now were mildly psychedelic. I kept hearing what sounded like whispering voices that seemed to come from everywhere, but when I listened closer, I could not catch what they were saying, just ghostly, disembodied, mumbling voices. The more I tried to listen to them to hear what they were saying, they would get quieter or stop like they knew I was listening and didn't want me to hear them. I also kept hearing the sound of a powerful, ghostly, moaning wind, although looking outside, there was no wind. I looked in the mirror again and saw that my pupils were now hugely dilated. Everything seemed to kind of sparkle away, and everything seemed impossibly beautiful. Things that I would normally take for granted or pay no attention to suddenly had this inexplicable allure to them. I was mildly delirious and forgetful, trying to turn off the lights that were already off and forgetting what I was doing, just staring off into space for, well, who knows how long before realising I was standing in place like a statue. After this, no more profound effects occurred. I realised it still hadn't been a high enough dose for a serious trip or mystical experience, so I soon went to bed, as I found it made me very, very tired, probably partly because of the valerian in the flying ointment. And to be honest, I had some of the most vivid lucid dreams I've ever had in my life. In these dreams, I was floating down long, dimly lit corridors and making beautiful things and people appear for my own amusement. I remember flying in all my dreams that night. Some of the dreams were even sexual in nature, and when I woke up a couple of times in the night, I found that I was extremely aroused. I did some research on this possible effect of the plants from the Solanaceae family, and found that belladonna has, in some cases, been used historically as an aphrodisiac for men, but from what I gathered from my research, it is not likely to have this effect on women. When I awoke the next day, I found that my vision was quite blurry, but thankfully was gone by the evening time. The strange thing about this blurry vision is that only certain things were actually blurry. Most things I could actually see clearly, but writing in particular was so blurry that it was almost impossible to read. I couldn't text all day because I just couldn't see what I was writing worth a damn. But like I said, this side effect was gone by the following evening. Second night. When my vision and equilibrium was back to normal the following night, I resolved around 11 PM to try it all again, and this time to use twice as much, hoping to reach the proper dose for a mystical and/or divinatory experience. So, I lathered on 2 liberal dabs of the flying ointment in the same places as before, I even went and made another tea, this time with 2 pinches of the belladonna plant, and 2 datura leaves and 1 datura flower. I drank this tea in about an hour's time, and began to notice the telltale sign of my throat drying out. About half an hour later, I noticed I was having the sensation of doors opening everywhere around me. Not literal doors, mind you, but rather invisible, interdimensional doors. I had the impression that I was becoming aware of another layer of reality spilling over into this one, and although I didn't see them visually, I could perceive entities coming in and out of the doorways and wandering through invisible hallways superimposed over this reality. The general feeling of the presence of others being there around me, moving quickly as if they had no time to waste in getting wherever they were going. I did not get the impression that these entities were either malevolent or benevolent, more neutral in nature, or even totally disinterested in humanity. The faint, inaudible whispering and the strong moaning winds began again. My body began to tingle somewhat in places, and as I was laying on my bed, I kept getting the sensation of floating just above the bed, rather than laying on it. I also got the real strong urge to urinate about every 30 seconds, but when I would try, nothing or almost nothing would come out, and even when it did, it was a strain. The tropane alkaloid containing plants are known for causing this side effect. It's not at all painful, just slightly annoying. I experienced none of the nausea or vomiting others have reported of this. In fact, I felt quite good. It actually seemed to make me very hungry, although eating was surely impossible. I tried to eat some goldfish crackers, and although they tasted ridiculously amazing, the texture in my arid, dry mouth and throat was like sand and was very, very difficult to swallow. I had to wash it down with water. So, after this, I just entirely gave up on eating. But being so thirsty, I kept on drinking water, and found that I needed to take small sips because if I gulped it, which I was very tempted to do, I'd feel like I was starting to choke on it. Once again, and even more so than the night before, I found myself delirious and forgetful, wandering around and then stopping for what seemed like a long while, lost in trance. And then, suddenly, I would wake up and half realize I'd just been staring into space for who knows how long. I did some scrying, which is gazing into a black mirror made of obsidian, for the purpose of divination, and in my trance state, I had a vision of floating across vast space and time to visit my lover, who was about 2 hours away from me. I saw him clear as day in the mirror, and I gave him loving, sensual energy, and also took some of his, which is a practice of psychic vampirism, an energy exchange. Whether this was real or simply a hallucinatory effect, no one could ever really know. But I will say, it seemed as real as anything ever could. After I was done with that, I wandered around, finding that my balance was atrocious and I nearly fell or ran into things several times. I also recall suddenly bursting into hysterical laughter at some profound revelation in my mind, although I do not actually remember what it was, unfortunately. The sense of time I was experiencing right now was rather warped as well, and time seemed to be going very, very slowly. I remember watching an hour-and-a-half long movie called Mr. Jones, which seemed somehow absurdly profound to me at the time, but the movie, well, it seemed to go on for hours. I didn't know what time it was, because my vision was too blurred to read digital clocks. I only became vaguely aware of how late it was when I ventured into the bathroom for about the millionth time and saw the dim light of morning shining in through the window. So I went to bed, very tired once again, and once again had very vivid, semi-lucid dreams. But now, this time, they were mostly unpleasant. Some were even nightmarish. I remember one of them involving me looking into the minds of many of my friends and family members, and discovering what they truly thought and felt about me. And most of all, it was not only unpleasant, but very mean. I remember screaming and crying and fighting with my mother in one of them. She was acting cruel and evil, very much unlike how she has ever acted in real life for the most part. She was calling me foul, derogatory names like faggot and things like that. In this dream, she hated me for being a homosexual, but in real life this hasn't been an issue since my young teenage years. I think that one was more of a psychological remnant of bitterness and resentment about things that happened between me and her in the distant past, which I suppose I've never actually fully come to terms with. I don't really remember much about the rest of the dreams, except for one, which thankfully wasn't a nightmare. I saw my mother going out on the porch and unplugging the Halloween lights I had put up for a decoration because it was going to rain. And then I saw her getting into a car and going to the grocery store. This was nothing epic or profound, but when I awoke I found that she had in fact done both of those things. Psychic dream or coincidence? Was this an out-of-body experience in which I was following my mother around, watching what she was doing? Well, I couldn't say. Believe what you want to believe. The next day, or today, I awoke and found my vision was blurred twice as bad, which makes sense because I did take twice as much. It is 12:30 at night now, and my vision is still blurred over 24 hours later, to the point that I could not even read text, let alone respond to them. I had to write this as a Word document in huge print just to be able to see it, and then copy and paste it. All in all, I would say this was a pleasant experience, although I still didn't quite reach the level that I wanted, and next time I plan on doubling the dose again. I must say, I am a fan. I know I'll definitely be doing it again sometime. Of course, it must be said that I do not endorse anyone doing this plant solely for the purpose of getting high, because it really isn't about that. I believe in a certain kind of animism, and I think that the spirit or essence of these plants knows when the user's intentions are pure and sacred, or simply vulgar, recreational pleasure-seeking, and it will treat the user accordingly.
A Cavern of Jewels. A Hawaiian Baby Woodrose, Salvia divinorum and Cannabis Trip Report by MDC. Posted to earwood.org September 20th, 2009. I used to trip on a very regular basis, but it had been over a year since I'd last tripped, and I wanted to trip again. I decided to start cultivating my own mushrooms for personal consumption again, but while waiting on that, ordered 2 new things I've always wanted to try but never have. I purchased 30 grams of dried Peruvian torch flesh and 10 seeds of Hawaiian Baby Woodrose. I decided to first try the Hawaiian Baby Woodrose the other day, and have yet to consume the Peruvian torch. I meticulously peeled the seeds and for further measure, wet them and rubbed them off anything else that I couldn't get with a knife point or fingernails alone. I let these dry overnight and the next morning crushed them in a garlic press. I then soaked the seeds in rather small amounts of distilled water for approximately 3 hours and ran a few errands. When I returned, I put some water on the stove and prepared 2 mugs of ginger green tea, one for prior to ingestion and one to immediately follow ingestion. I'd heard a number of complaints of serious stomach upset from the seeds and hoped the ginger would help ease any discomfort. I strained any large chunks of seed out of the extract, leaving a slightly gritty but clear liquid with a colour similar to a pale golden liquor. This I mixed with a good quantity of orange juice to help mask any potentially unpleasant flavour, which it did beautifully. In about 20 to 30 minutes I began feeling lethargic and experienced a pronounced pain in the stomach, but no nausea. I decided to go lay down in bed for a while to help calm my stomach and nerves. I lay with my eyes closed for almost the entire time and drifted in and out of dreamlike visions and distinct but mild closed-eye visuals. I cannot, at this moment, remember all that I witnessed, and of course at 10 seeds it was not the most visually intricate or distinct of visual phenomena, but it was very present indeed. I do remember a vast field of nothingness with points of white and blue light that was shifting between being stars and being blocks, emanating from the centre of a non-existent cross. That is to say, there were 4 fields of these regularly spaced lights with space between each field. I remember more intricate and far less describable visual patterning, which rippled like the surface of a lake. Colours were hard to describe, and more often left simply the impression of a colour, but I seemed to have the impression of many oranges, reds, greens and blues. A number of odd images briefly flashed in my mind's eye, but were elusive and hard to identify, let alone describe. I slipped often between the closed-eye patterns and a dreamy state, where the effects were very psychedelic, but I still also felt quite tired. and haven't any idea whether I really kept falling asleep and actually dreaming for brief periods, or if I was simply having particularly strong visions. It wasn't like normal dreams I have, but neither was it anything at all like the normal visuals I've experienced of psychedelics before. The previous visions and experiences made up about the first 2 hours of the experience, which really surprised and excited me. Upon rising from this trance-like state, I felt no nausea but a continued pain in the gut, which didn't leave until the effects diminished entirely. While I didn't feel sick, I knew I must purge and went to the bathroom to do so and felt quite better afterwards. I was feeling exhilarated now, and the effects were still strong and reminded me very much of the feeling of mushrooms at acid. But I was to find the 2-hour come-up was to include the most intense effects I would receive from the seeds alone. I knew I had a long way to go and was unsure if the effects would keep increasing or taper away very, very slowly. I was aware I'd experienced a peak very early on, and decided to wait and find out. So I went to my living room, smoked a bong, and drank some water while watching Labyrinth. After the movie, I realised the marijuana made the experience more pleasant, but I had reached the highest level of intensity there would be and passed it for good. It had been quite a while since tripping, but I had some 10x Salvia divinorum extract left from a long while ago. My original experiences with Salvia were very positive and spiritual, but later on I began having only quite frightening trips which are hard to handle and caused me to go on a long time without using it. I suspected that being in an entirely fairly psychedelic state, it may be easier for me to take the transition into the other reality of Salvia and decide to test this hypothesis. I settled into bed, prepared a very small test it, just to give me a reminder of what a heavier experience would be like, to help me decide whether I really wanted to proceed with this. Upon smoking this tiny hit, I closed my eyes and noticed a definite but mild shift in consciousness to begin with, followed by very fluid and flowing visual patterning. I got some very real effects and handled the experience beautifully, and really enjoyed the lovely imagery and unusual mindset of the Salvia experience, mild though it was. As I returned to mostly normal reality, I decided in fact wished to proceed into a much more profound excursion, but still did not wish to overdo things. I put in a hit about twice as big as the previous one, but still a small hit. Upon smoking this and again closing my eyes, the visual patterning returned quite strongly and became a whirling tornado of patterns and colour. I began to lose any and all knowledge of my body and my life outside of this other dimension. My existence right now was purely spiritual and mental, a point of awareness and being with no name or face, but which surely could still see. The patterning wrapped itself around me, circling, and then split into an upper and lower portion, each spinning another way. The patterns quickly gave way to the more otherworldly space as I broke through and came into a physically different place altogether. I had the sense of rising, but rising through the earth into a cavern deep within the earth. This cavern was full of colours and intricate designs, and was inhabited by some sort of object containing an entity or entities, a multifaceted object with a machine-like exoskeleton, but with facets like shining jewels. Each facet seemed to be a face or eye, but it was unclear if every one was different or all the same entity. It spoke to me as one, welcoming me and calling me by name, reminding me who I was. Oddly, I was the one communicating telepathically, repeatedly stating that I'd returned. I take this to be a statement of humility and accomplishment simultaneously, as well as one of reverence. I feel as though the past few heavy trips had taken me to a hellish realm which was a form of punishment for misusing the substance, whereas initially I received wonderful visions of deities and witnessed spontaneous healing of a loved one, and was privy to what goes on behind the scenes. My statement and feeling of having returned was quite significant, I must say, implying not only that I'd returned, but that I'd learned from mistakes and wished to approach carefully and humbly now, and wished to learn what can be taught. As is usually the case with significant salvia trips, right as I was becoming reoriented in my new environment, I was pushed back down into normal reality, back into my head. My eyes snapped open, and I could see my room, but could not figure out yet who or where I was, and it took several minutes of lying there to reorient myself with ordinary reality. At first, I even felt as though I may have gone back to the wrong place, into someone else's head. In fact, I felt like my head was in the right place, but felt as if my body was being directly beneath my head standing upright, not in front of my head laying down as I could see this person doing. I felt my hand on my chest, but didn't know for sure if I was alone or not. Was it my hand, or even my chest? Could I be sure they were both mine? I could still sense the presence of the entity to the left of me, but could see nothing out of the ordinary. As I finally came to grips with everything, I looked at a clock. The 2 salvia trips had taken about 25 to 30 minutes. I kept waiting to come down completely from the salvia until I remembered that I had taken the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and would not return to baseline for probably another 4 hours at least. I spent a while just sitting outdoors on my balcony reflecting on the salvia trips and drinking water. I soon made some food for myself as it was the middle of the afternoon and I'd yet to even eat. After a while of just being still and quiet, I went back indoors and decided to watch some TV for a while and smoke some more bong hits. The very last effects were diminishing around 9.5 hours in, and I enjoyed a small drink of gin and a homebrew now that my stomach was feeling better. Sleep came easily later that night as well, and I felt well rested the next day. All in all, I'm actually quite surprised with the experience. I'm particularly surprised at the intensity of the trip during the come-up and the trance-like state I experienced initially. As mild as the rest of the trip was, and salvia, I was shocked at the effects I received initially. I was quite pleased with the effects of the HPWR and noted remarkable mental clarity throughout the experience. I will definitely try these seeds again, both by themselves in a higher dose and in the same dose in addition to some cubensis mushrooms. The Pusher of Universes, a Hawaiian baby woodrose and Salvia divinorum trip report by Psych Rick, posted at earwood.org January 14, 2014. About 2 or more years ago, I started getting very interested in entheogens and medicinal botanicals. I've already vastly entered the realms of psychedelia and drugs. More recently though, I found a new respect for drugs and life in general. My experience with entheogens such as mushrooms, LSD, salvia, MDMA, LSA and hash have been crucial to my growth in spirituality and altered states. Other drugs I've experimented with but now avoid are pharmaceuticals like Xanax, Adderall, Valium, Oxycontin, etc., as well as alcohol, heroin, DXM or Robo. I found that treating the substance respectfully by creating experience with a well-planned set and setting is the best way to experience any drug, but mostly in my case entheogens and psychedelics. Which is what leads me to my latest experiment, with the Hawaiian baby woodrose seed and smoking salvia extract in the peak of my Hawaiian baby woodrose trip. Preparation. I grinded 10 seeds in a coffee grinder, then mixed them with some applesauce and enjoyed them. Onset. Within 45 minutes, I noticed a pleasant tingling or light buzzing in my legs and head. I got a little cold in my house, so I decided to go on a walk for a bit. When I was walking, I felt a little bit cramping or pain in my stomach area emerge, so then sparked up my cannabis joint, which immediately calmed any discomfort. After the joint and a half-a-mile walk, I started feeling alert and felt this pressure around my eyes. It wasn't unpleasant at all, but something that reminds me of when I do LSD. Energy bursts were creeping up at me anywhere from my inner thighs to my feet and head and body, so I decided to stroll on back home. Once I walked inside and took my shoes off, I quickly noticed an amazing amount of euphoria and bliss enter my consciousness, much like a wave of LSD but with no visuals. At this point, I sat relaxed on my couch and turned up some psychedelic music. Being a musician myself, I suddenly realised how amazing and deep the music sounded. I laid back and let the music and energy waves coexist in my sensory field. Closing my eyes, I saw green tunnels moving fast and eventually stopping at this huge neon green ball of light that was so vivid I knew it was a closed-eye visual. After about another hour and a half of exploring my closed-eye visuals, which were nowhere near mushrooms or LSD, but nonetheless very pleasant with the aid of music, I decided to take it up a few notches. I packed a nice-sized hit of Salvia 10X in my glass pipe, dimmed the lights, and began meditating, for I was not a beginner of the sacred herb and knew very well what Sally could do to a man. I then go on to acknowledge the power of Salvia divinorum and asked her to give me an insightful and not too intense experience since I was already tripping. I wanted to break through to the Salvia dimensions, but I did not want to experience any turbulence along the way. With that said, I hit the pipe without letting the lighter stop burning the herb and took a huge hit, holding it in for over 30 seconds. By the time I blew out the hit, I saw my visual plane almost crack in time, and within 10 seconds I felt like I was being pushed really fast and squished next to other bodies of flesh. I was being pulled deep into the Salvia world, with no idea what I was getting myself into. Finally, after what seemed 10 minutes, I felt as if the force pushing me relaxed, and I was able to vividly witness one huge archetypal image of multiple universes, including ours being organized and controlled by this pusher. My emotions were shocked with this feeling of being infused with this pusher that pulled me out of my dimension. It was as if time was truly no more, and I had no thought of the normal plane we all experience on an everyday basis. My sole purpose right now was to move universes and spirits in correct alignment with me. Remember, I fused with the pusher archetype that pulled me into this realm. A vision of my infused form with this pusher entity was seen in an out-of-body experience-like view. It's hard to explain what its appearance really was, but I could most closely relate it to a caterpillar in a train and colourful images on its body in spirals around its aura. The vision lasted for a while, but slowly and surely was fading away, and slowly but surely I realised I was looking at my living room. I was cracking up when I realised I just came back from the salvia trip because I actually forgot I was a human. I was like, nah, no way. I actually forgot. After laying down and feeling the huge euphoric infusions of the afterglow of salvia and the LSA from the seeds, the salvia come down intensified my LSA effects for 2 hours, and I was literally getting these amazing visuals that felt cartoon-like, some breathing or moving and dancing qualities on surfaces. I noticed very bright lights and almost tracer-like images from lights in any form. The euphoria from the seeds was still waving in and out, and slowly the salvia afterglow was gone. I smoked another joint and realised after the salvia experience fully subsided that I was actually quite stimulated. I decided to take myself on a bike ride, and then went home and talked on the phone to close friends enthusiastically. A lot of research I've done for Hawaiian baby woodrows says that they are sedating for most people compared to the stimulating effects of LSD. I personally felt almost the same effects from LSD except the visuals and the intense spiritual talkative mindset. Overall, I must say that Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds were not that nauseating as I thought they'd be, but they were actually quite stimulating with a marked euphoria, energy burst, entactogenic qualities, very few open-eye visuals, more chance of simple fantasy or imaginative closed-eye visuals, and any discomfort from cramps were neutralised from cannabis. The euphoric mindset was perfect for inducing me into the salvia trance, but I strongly suggest you be careful because I noticed the salvia trip seemed to last a lot longer when I was on Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds compared to just stoned or baseline. I also recall feeling like I was in the experience a lot longer. It seemed a lifetime before my return to home base. So if you don't want to have a very long, in-depth salvia experience that can be quite intense, then do not do Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds first. But overall for me, it was the most unique and theogenic experience that I've had to date. The Highest of Highs. A Hawaiian baby woodrows and Salvia divinorum trip report by Cameron. Posted to earwood.org, December 5th, 2011. I have little experience with tripping on salvia, and no experience with tripping on LSD. I developed a bit of control with my salvia trips, so I thought I would take the leap of tripping for a great deal of time on a more powerful psychoactive drug. I crushed 10 seeds of HBWR and chewed them for about 2 minutes about 6:30 PM. Soon after, the first hour of my experience, I felt a warming sensation in my head. It was distinct enough to tell that this was not just wishful thinking, but that the seeds were doing something. During the course of that hour, every so often I would feel a flash of what seemed like insanity for less than half of a second. From what I'd heard about LSD experiences and the fact that LSA was very similar, I was expecting to have a very colourful and unique trip, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. After a half hour or so of this warming sensation and these brief glimpses of insanity, I thought I could help the LSA trip begin by using salvia. I sat at my desk and inhaled 2 very deep breaths of salvia, holding both breaths inside my lungs as long as I possibly could. In a matter of seconds, I was in a new mindset. I was still in my room, the TV was still on the same program, and for the most part everything in my room was how it should be, but the only exception was that I felt the presence of many beings in the room with me. I didn't question their lack of body and voice, but rather I just knew they were there. These beings have appeared in other salvia trips I've had. I often speak to them, and when I'm having a bad trip, I yell. When I'm having a bad trip, I tell the beings that I'm not going to give in and panic, because panicking is really what they want. After I regained my normal state of mind, the warming sensation was gone, and I began to feel a bit of nausea. I called my friend with whom I've previously used salvia and told him of these effects I was feeling. They were mild and I didn't have much to say. Still seemed intrigued though, because I'd mentioned the seed's capabilities in the past. So, concluding the conversation, he told me to call him if I felt anything more going forward. After about an hour or more of intense nausea, I started to experience a feeling of well-being. At first I assumed I was only feeling good because the nausea was subsiding, but I didn't want to lead myself on thinking that the seeds were beginning to take effect. After about 20 minutes of this feeling intensifying, I concluded that this was indeed effects from the seeds. This intense feeling lasted from about 9 PM until 3 AM. At the time I remember thinking to myself, euphoria, euphoria, euphoria. Although there were no visual hallucinations during this trip, my hearing became incredibly perceptive instead. There were 3 sounds in my room at the time: the TV, the ceiling fan, and the fan inside my laptop. I could hear each sound individually and incredibly accurately. Every so often, the very subtly volumed fan inside my laptop would stop running, and I would immediately take notice of it. The absence of this sound would make me feel completely different. My body seemed to keep releasing chemicals that heightened my mood, yet I felt 100% different. At about 1 AM, I really wanted to just go to sleep. My body felt completely drained of energy and my eyelids were very, very heavy. I went to the bathroom before I attempted to go to sleep like I always do. My mind was completely clear at the time, but I walked and moved as if I were drunk. Stumbling along the way, I made it to the bathroom. I looked into the mirror and my everlasting smile grew dramatically. The green rings in my eyes were a very thin hairline, while the rest was clouded by a deep black pupil. I laid my head down to rest, but realised that sleep was far from possible in spite of my incredible fatigue. My mind was just racing. I couldn't control the presence of song, nor could I subdue the tapping of my fingers to the beat. I began to grow frustrated with my active mind. I grew increasingly worried that these euphoric feelings would never cease, while at the same time I was still completely consumed in the happiness. At about 2 AM, the effects began to diminish and I fell asleep a little after 3 AM. I was utterly exhausted, yet I laid in darkness for over 2 hours before falling asleep. My trip was characterised solely by intense euphoria. Over the course of the 6 hours, I thought about many things that would normally upset me, but my mood could not be altered. The smile on my face could not be wiped away whatsoever. I tried many times to hold a straight face, but I could not succeed for more than 10 seconds at a time. I've had many good days throughout my lifetime, but no moment could compare to what I felt every second of this trip. This was a kind of happiness that could not be achieved with chemical induction. One would think such an incredible experience would yield a hefty price, yet I felt no come down of any kind the following day. The only price I paid was about $20 for 50 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Although I felt no visual hallucinations whatsoever like I'd actually expected, I do fully intend to repeat this experiment. Waves of Euphoria. An AL Lad, an LSD trip report by ZZ. Posted to earwid.org, January 7th, 2016. I am moderately experienced with LSD, and before this had tried AL Lad twice, at 150 and 75 micrograms. At 150 micrograms, AL Lad felt quite clear-headed and nicely euphoric, but missing the sense of oneness that a decent LSD dose provides. I decided on a single 150 microgram tab of AL Lad, with 2/3 of a strong LSD blotter purchased online almost 2 years ago. It was advertised at 250 micrograms, but was probably more like 150, so what I took was maybe around 100 micrograms. But who really knows? The setting. I had the flat to myself for a few days, and since I prefer tripping alone, this was the best I could get. I sadly have no access to the great outdoors, but then again, it's winter. So, at 11:45 PM, I jammed both blotters in my cheeks and prepared for what was to come. I started feeling the first effects within 25 minutes. It started with noticeable mucus build-up.
I put on some classic dub techno and sat on the couch as the drug started to take effect. Normally on a strong dose of LSD, the come-up can be a bit disconcerting. I may fear for my sanity and have to remind myself to relax. What happened here was different though. There was an observer, to borrow from Anne Shulgin, part of myself noticing how it felt like I was losing my mind. I attribute this to the ale lad, as though it was keeping part of my ego intact while the LSD slowly dissolved the rest. This peculiar duality of effects was noticeable throughout the whole trip. Physically, I did feel a bit awkward, not quite knowing what to do with myself as I got more and more restless. I started thinking about my relationships with the people I live with, how entangled our lives had become, my stuff being spread about the apartment like an extension of myself. And as I caught myself pacing about my room and overthinking, I decided to calm down on the couch again. As my field of vision got more and more melty, now with patterns flowing and ebbing in the grain of the wood floor and furniture, I felt I might be in for quite a ride. I didn't try to keep track of time too much, but soon enough I found myself stretching my arms in the doorframe of my bedroom and breathing deeply as I got more and more overwhelmed, reminding myself that I'd taken a drug. I tried lying down in my bed for a bit, and that's when I had the first of a series of peaks. LSD users are probably familiar with pulling tension in the neck and back when the drug hits the strongest. I felt it quite intensely, but it was more pleasant than usual, and nowhere near as concerning as it has been in the past, with a full LSD tab from the same batch for example. As I lay there, I closed my eyes to see bright lights and spiralling patterns. Then, I heard remarkable sonic distortions, something not unlike shepherd tones, but with crazy irregular fluctuations in rhythm, as if someone was messing with the LFO on an analog synthesizer. It should be noted that I suffer from tinnitus, so it might have something to do with it. I wondered if these sounds were distinct from my tinnitus, but couldn't tell them apart. The tension in the back of my head got quite intense, and I felt almost as if I'd had a mini seizure, for the lack of a better word. For a moment I thought I'd blacked out, and I remember telling myself, what the hell was that, as I got up from my bed. Then it hit me. I was now full on tripping. I decided to play some demos a friend had just sent me. I found it so good I couldn't help but play one particular track over and over in absolute awe of it. I sent him an email about how a particular sound kept making me laugh. Days later I explained to him that I was tripping. I then had echoes of a previous trip from 2 years ago that had been very intense. I'd flat out forgotten that I was on a drug. Something in me kept repeating, I just had an LSD. I just had an LSD. As if it's an event that happens to you. And also, this is why people take LSD. This is why people take LSD. That indescribable sensation of oneness, of time and spacelessness. Only this time, I was going back and forth between that kind of confusion and a somewhat more functional state of mind, which again, I attribute to the owl lad. I spontaneously started stretching, as happens almost every time I take LSD, then found myself in that familiar acid headspace, welcoming me back. I felt relieved. This time, there were no sinister undertones at all, and no sense that I might lose control, as I still had that observer around, even when things got pretty intense with that sensation there are no words for. I guess the best phrase for that would be ego dissolving. Anyway, over the course of the trip, I felt up to 4 or 5 long waves of exquisitely intense euphoria, unlike anything I've ever felt. It was as if my body was pure energy. Whenever the peak receded, I tried to think about what to call it. Seizure? Peak? Full body orgasm? Whatever it was absolutely beautiful. I kept telling myself, oh, don't try to put words on it, just enjoy it while it lasts. I remember the title of the Capra film, You Can't Take It With You, which I think applies quite well to the psychedelic experience, although completely unrelated to the actual film. I thought to myself how the psychedelic mindset always feels like a switch has been flicked on. When sober, it's nearly impossible to recall just how one feels while tripping, and it's always a pleasure to revisit that realm. At one point I found myself crouching in my room, nodding along to some music, only to realise there was none playing from my speakers. It was a real piece playing in my head. I laughed hard at this. I wondered if I was functional enough to try making music myself and turned on various synths. But then I couldn't be bothered. I was enjoying the trip and the silence so much, in a Cagean way perhaps, that I was completely indifferent to having music playing or not at that point. I had some thoughts about how music is so much about throwing one's ego out there and felt it was more appropriate to contemplate silence for a while. After enjoying a few more moments of eternity, I found a memento a dear friend had just given me a few days prior, deep in my jean pocket. As I took it out, I immediately thought of her and was filled with an immense joy. That little object was just full of her love. I laughed heartily, kneeled and kissed it. It was as though the memento and my friend were one and the same. She was there with me, in my hand. I briefly tried to write to her, but I could not find the words, and my observer rightly advised me against doing that while tripping anyway, although she is fully aware and supportive of those experiments of mine. Anyway, needless to say, it was a profoundly beautiful moment. As I delighted in a few more of the peaks, I finally decided to play some music, which sounded absolutely amazing. In fact, I don't recall music ever sounding this exciting on either LSD or Al-Lad alone. I played a particular piece repeatedly, then sent a quick note of appreciation to its creator. I also reflected on my inferiority complex toward other musicians, and the need to rid myself of all jealousy and simply get out there, in contradiction with my earlier thoughts. Visually, things never got too intense, which was a bit of a surprise. Maybe I just didn't focus enough on that aspect. I had flashes of faces forming patterns in the wood floor, but not much more. Some were sinister looking, but I was able to laugh them off. Catching a glimpse of one of the cats drinking water, I briefly saw a pattern of demonic faces stretching across the floor from where the cat was, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, and a great Photoshop idea. When I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I was astounded to see myself looking perfectly normal, pupils not even dilated. Eventually I started coming down, and this is where I became more introspective, questioning my interactions with others, my place among my peers and my friends, reflecting on a past relationship and seeing where I was still needlessly negative about my former partner, who was still a dear friend. I caught myself thinking negatively about her, and resolved to stop judging others for what I perceive to be faults but are in fact my own lack of empathy. Anyway, now we get to the bad part. The come down was simply interminable. At first I was seeing strobe-like flashes in my field of vision as I closed my eyes, and melatonin proved useless. I was simply restless for hours in bed, turning to my phone to spew silly non-sequiturs on social media. I also noticed I was getting quite a headache. It wasn't until 2 or maybe 3 PM that I was finally able to sleep, after taking some ibuprofen. I did not sleep long then, but that evening I went to bed before 10 PM and had vivid dreams. The next day, I found myself in a rather foul mood which persisted for quite a while. I napped a number of times and didn't accomplish much. For the remainder of the week, I slept much more than usual. Would I try this again? Probably, but not soon. I think I may not try Al-Lad on its own now that I felt how LSD can complement it so nicely. Overall, it was a positive and supremely euphoric experience. I don't remember laughing so much on a psychedelic since my first mushroom trips as a teenager. For me, nowadays, mushrooms feel mostly dark and anxiogenic. The main drawback with this though remains the inability to sleep, as I object to the use of benzodiazepines and other sleep aids. I doubt I'd recommend this combo to anyone other than a seasoned LSD user, and I would hesitate to try this in a public setting, although it was nowhere near as disorienting as a strong LSD trip can be. As with all intense psychedelic trips, full integration might take a while. It might prove tricky since part of me still felt sober, taking in the euphoria only for what it was. There was clearly more depth compared to what Al-Lad alone can provide, but I feel a higher ratio of LSD might be preferable, although there is a higher risk of losing it. Postscriptum about the body load. This combo is not without its share of physical side effects. The only word I could find to describe my body as I was tripping was blurry. There was some gastric weirdness, and I certainly passed a lot of gas after the last of the intense peaks. But no pain, and I've experienced excruciating gut pain on LSD before. My gums and teeth felt uncomfortable at times, and the aforementioned headache was quite unpleasant.
Heaven and Hell in my unconscious mind. A 2F-fluoro-deschloroketamine and 4-ACO-DMT trip report by A.O. Vivec, posted to earwid.org March 2nd, 2019. I don't ever type up trip reports, because no matter how intense or beautiful the trip was, there is always someone out there who has written a better, more detailed report of a similar experience. However, that being said, last night I experienced something induced by 2 research chemicals that I did not think was possible for drugs to do, even after heavy psychonautical exploration over the last 7 years with every dissociative or psychedelic substance you can possibly imagine. I believe this trip was an intensely personal, subjective one that needs to be shared with the world. I really don't understand what happened to me, but maybe typing it out will help me work through it all. I recently acquired 2 grams of 2FDCK for the sole purpose of holing on it. Thus far, both times I've attempted a large enough dose for a hole, 150 milligrams and 230 milligrams. As soon as I laid down and turned off my light, I fell asleep and woke up the next morning. Disappointing to say the least. I definitely felt there was an unconscious hole happening, but that wasn't lucid enough to experience or remember it. Last night, though, was very different. Setting. I'd just gotten into an argument with my brother and was feeling a bit sad, frustrated. I normally don't go into trips with anything but a positive mindset, but the 2FDCK hadn't been particularly psychedelic in my research, because of my coma-like sleep paralysis. And so, I decided to do some just to sort of numb myself. T plus 0 hours. I began with 136 milligrams divided up into 6 lines. It is a very crystally beige, sticky substance, which I chopped, ground into a powder. I put saline spray up at each nostril and after each line. T plus 30 minutes. The lines have been insufflated. The first 2 to 3 lines are in full effect. The last 2 to 3 are kicking in quick. Typical slowing of thought processes, feeling very tranquil and trance-like. I was feeling so nice at this point, I'd forgiven my brother and decided to go for my initial plan, which was to try and combine 4-ACO-DMT with the 2FDCK. In my heavily altered state, I managed to weigh out 15 milligrams, chop it into 2 small bumps, and put them up each nostril. Keep in mind I was being careful in my dosage here, as I've gone up to 50 milligrams on the stuff, which was like a full-blown 4-hour DMT trip. I also weighed out an extra 50 milligrams of the 2FDCK to insufflate once the 4-ACO had kicked in. T plus 50 minutes. I'm beginning to perceive heavy auditory hallucinations, like clanging bells which make me uncomfortable, and decide that it's time for music. I put on Deakin's album, Sleep Cycle, and it is really, utterly beautiful. I lay down in bed and began experiencing typical mushroom-esque colours and visuals on top of the extremely tranquil feeling of the 2FDCK. T plus 1 hour. The 4-ACO is coming on quite strong at this point, and I'm experiencing pronounced euphoria. I decide it's time to try and go even deeper, go for a hole, in fact. I take a hit of cannabis, insufflate the extra 50 milligrams of 2FDCK, and lay back in bed. T plus 1 hour and 20? ? Well, time loses meaning here, and this is where I'll try my best to explain the bulk of what happened to me. First, I completely dissociated from my body and surroundings. The room broke away from me, and I entered a deep space. Even on my heaviest trips such as DXM and LSD, I've always still had a semblance of my appendages or surroundings. Not this time though. I was truly in a hole, with maroon structures around me shifting and morphing into memories of my past and childhood, while I myself became these structures. The music ends, the auditory hallucinations take over. I am hearing church organs and heavenly voices speaking to me. T plus 1 hour, 30 minutes? I begin to enter heaven. This isn't euphoria, it is something much greater. With each passing moment I am experiencing a further and further awakening of consciousness.
I've always wondered how heaven could be perfect and beautiful if it's just the same old thing, day after day. I now understand that it is very possible when, every second, one becomes more and more enlightened, more and more in tune with their original oneness. Just when I thought I had reached the pinnacle of enlightenment, I continued to expand, just like the universe itself. Strangely, Reddit becomes the dominating motif during this stage of the trip. It becomes the meaning of life. A way for the true interconnectedness of humanity to become one big amorphous consciousness. I see holographic images of karma, upvotes, downvotes floating past me. Based off of my semi-recent rediscovery of the research chemical world through Reddit, after taking some years off after a bad 25i NBOME experience and sticking to the classical psychs, I truly believed that I ingested a combination of drugs that unlocks the key to heaven. An ever-expanding consciousness that experiences a more profound incarnation of beauty and understanding with each passing moment, and that I would never leave it. I was that far gone in the hole. It was truly like floating in space, merging back into the conscious particle that once preceded the Big Bang, which eventually fragmented consciousness into billions of pieces and is the root of our suffering. I was returning back to this original state. Reddit, of all things, was the way to tape these pieces back together, and in fact, I had actually become Reddit itself, experiencing each interaction, thread, person, all at once. I think it was a metaphor that I concocted in my head for the meaning of life. A striving for reintegration, unification of the consciousness of humanity which has been scattered everywhere. Stars are all around me. T plus 2 hours? ? Here, things suddenly turn around drastically. Rather than expanding and going upward, I begin shrinking, falling into a different dimension entirely. Suddenly, I am in hell, experiencing eternity forever, completely alone. The negation of time, space, arms, and legs are suddenly no longer beautiful, but the worst thing you could ever imagine. It is forever the same thing, over and over again. I will be here for eternity, and I am forever falling deeper into an empty void of nothingness, like that guy in the Black Mirror episode that gets trapped in his own video game out in deep space, or the hammering man in Seattle who is perpetually hammering away day and night. I'm convinced that this is inextricably linked to a book I'm reading for a class. I am an English major, and we are reading Our Nig by Harriet Wilson. It is utterly and completely heartbreaking. An autobiographical novel of an abused slave, Fredo. She tries so hard to be good and yet still is in hell every day of her life without deserving it. She eventually turns to the Christian God and finds salvation. The trip begins to feel something like salvia now. That everything in my life had been a test, trying to get me to believe in the Christian God, and yet I still denied him. Even though I'm so utterly comfortable in comparison with the hell that Fredo goes through, yet even she found in herself to believe in the Christian God. Reading Our Nig was my final test, and instead of accepting God, the book actually made me hate him even more for making an innocent person's life so miserable for no reason, and mine so comfortable that I can order drugs off the internet. I see my teacher's face as a motif for an apostle trying to convert me, even though I doubt she's actually a Christian. I truly believe that all the Christian values and ideas pushed on every person in the Western world were actually true, and that I was being punished for not taking the leap of faith and accepting God. It was the one thing that no one is 100% sure about. And all those crazy Christians were goddamn right all along. Damn it. Then, I accept that I failed my test and will be here forever, experiencing all the suffering and pain that the world contains. Things then go completely black. 3:30. I begin to regain consciousness of my room, and even though everything felt so real while it was happening, I'm strangely not surprised at all that it turned out to be a figment of my unconscious mind. It's as if I exited this realm as quickly as I began, and am almost sober again. I'm so happy to be alive, and I just lay in bed and try to process what had just happened. 4. I get up and realise my gait is still very off. I'm in a hypnagogic state, feeling extremely relaxed and at peace with the world. I stagger downstairs, nearly sleepwalking, and eat a salad and an apple which tastes beautiful. 4:30. I quickly drift into a deep and restful slumber. My conclusion and reflections is that this was really unlike anything I have ever experienced on substances, which is quite a lot. I journeyed into my subconscious mind. The 2FDCK dissociated me completely from my body and surroundings, and the 4ACO allowed for the most profound spiritual insight I've ever had, even of something like 8 grams of potent mushrooms or a DMT breakthrough. I don't actually believe Reddit or Christianity are really as important as they were during the trip, but that they were metaphors. Reddit equals reunification of consciousness. Christianity equals evil, as something that gives a false sense of hope to someone completely alone in an unforgiving world. I would 100% repeat this experience and plan to try something similar in a couple of weeks. But at the moment, I have so much to reflect on that I definitely need to chill for a while. If you read all this, thank you. I love you all and hope you all find happiness in this life. To me, hell is isolation, solitude, and vice versa. It is important to cherish loved ones, be kind, and try to reduce the overall suffering in this world. That is the meaning of life for me, and it's all I can do until my day of judgment. P.S. Psychs and dissos are a completely different experience when taken together than they are on their own.
An agnostic meets his higher power. A DMT, DPT, meclobamide and nitrous oxide trip report by Victor Borge. Posted to earwid.org, June 7th, 2005. Freebase DMT was not something I ever really imagined having a chance to taste, but as with so many of the most profound and important experiences in life, it more or less fell into my lap, and all I had to do, all I could do, was make the best use of it as I could. Set and setting. Alone in my condo on a Friday night. It had been a long time, relatively, since I'd last used psychedelics. In the meantime, I'd been practicing meditation, strengthening and exploring my own mind and spirit, and making some important steps forward with my life. I felt confident and ready for anything. On this evening, I had decided to reattempt, together, 2 well-regarded tryptamines I had tried before individually and had disappointing experiences with, while still feeling there was potential in. To wit, I would be ingesting NN-DPT and NN-DMT stacked on top of each other, potentiated with an MAOI and garnished liberally with nitrous oxide. At T+0 hours, I pre-dosed with 150 milligrams of meclobamide. I did not plan to take either tryptamine orally, so this was largely a superfluous step. But I wanted to maximise the effect of both substances as much as possible, since standard doses had not worked for me in the past. It should be noted that if either substance had been an amphetamine or a phenethylamine, I would emphatically not have used an MAOI. But with tryptamines, as long as I'm careful with dosage, I've never had ill effects with MAOIs, just stronger experiences. At 1 hour in, I insufflated roughly half of a weighed dose of 110 milligrams of DPT. I immediately followed the insufflation with a bulb of nitrous to help allay the burn and the bothersomeness of the drip. I also grabbed a bottle of lemon juice and periodically squirted a bit down my throat to counteract the drip as well. I find this works wonders against the alkaline burn. I sat down to watch television as I waited for the effects. Getting satellite TV and a TiVo has unfortunately increased the quantity of my TV viewing, I'm sad to say, but on the other hand, also the quality. In about 30 minutes, I felt the warm body buzz of DPT creeping in. Mild flowering visuals also began to develop, and overall it was a plus, maybe a plus experience in terms of my ability to interact with reality. But it was such a relaxed, almost sleepy trip that it didn't feel like a plus. DPT for myself has quite a sedative effect, and I often feel myself staring into space with my eyes drifting closed when I take it. More like a trance than like sleeping, but still quite the opposite from the hyper-alertness of phenethylamine-based psychedelics. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I inhaled about 20 bulbs of nitrous oxide. Rather than doing 2 in rapid succession, as I usually do if I'm trying to launch off into a plus, I just kept up a steady pace of 1 bulb every few minutes. This eventually put me into a very relaxed, slightly drunken state of mind, which, combined with the DPT, meant that I was, pretty wasted, to be honest. Psychedelic effects aside, I was probably as out of it as I would be from 3 to 4 drinks. Before long, I felt ready to attempt the DMT. As I indicated, my first 2 tries smoking 50 mg of DMT had been sore disappointments, resulting in a brief trance-like state with some nice visuals but no more than a plus, which, after all the hype surrounding this drug, was actually quite the bummer. I queued up my favourite tripping playlist on iTunes, which I've set to play wirelessly from a laptop through my central stereo system, courtesy of Apple's Airport Express. I sat down in my favourite chair and took several deep breaths to centre my spirit. After 2 hours and 15 minutes, I placed 80 mg of DMT freebase in a pre-warmed light bulb vaporizer, applying a butane torch, waiting until I saw vapour, and inhaling 3 hits. After the 3rd hit, I felt a heaviness rapidly building up in my limbs, in a potentious rush I was familiar with from 5-MeO DMT. I quickly put out the torch and set it and the hot bulb down on a china plate on the floor, which I had placed there ahead of time to avoid setting fire to the rug. I sat back in the chair and, almost as an afterthought, exhaled a big cloud of smoke. That was the last action I took in this universe. Before I talk about what happened next, there's a quick observation. The effects of a high dose of LSD, my favourite drug, are intensely memorable, gorgeous, soul-plumbing, something one wants to repeat again and again, partly because the experience is so beautiful and at the same time so chaotic and hard to piece back together. It's a bit like William James's description of the nitrous trip. As sobriety returns, the feeling of insight fades, and one is left staring vacantly at a few disjointed words and phrases, as one stares at a cadaverous-looking snow peak from which sunset glow has just fled, or at a black cinder left by an extinguished brand. DMT, for myself, was not actually like this. Although the intensity of the memory faded somewhat in the days that followed, it seems to me that I can still remember almost every second of the trip, and it was full of intentional meaning, and anything but chaotic. Back to me in my chair surrounded by smoke. The song playing on the stereo at that moment was a reggae track called Free Up Black Man. I'm not a reggae fan per se, and this selection was rather accidental. I'd not thought to fast forward to one of my favourite songs in time for the DMT flash, and in hindsight that might have been an improvement. But I almost think it was better to be listening to the haunting, exotic melodies of the islands rather than something artificial, electronic, and acid-like. As I exhaled the smoke, I powerfully noticed the way in which the cone of smoke, as it left my mouth, lined up in perfect symmetry between the frames of 2 paintings hanging on the wall. Actually, symmetry was suddenly everywhere. Glancing down, I saw the ornate patterns in the oriental rug organising themselves like nanobots into bigger and bigger clusters of units. I closed my eyes for a brief second, and behind my lids this activity continued unabated. The entire universe was organising itself, falling into lines and regiments of ordered, coloured blocks, all at the command, I sensed, of some master entity.
an all-powerful him. Yes, it was decidedly male. I don't consciously believe in a male divinity, but I cannot deny that aspect of this particular experience. Inside my head, I could sense my synapses being corralled by the drug. Inside me, it was the drug, not him. For the first few seconds, I went back and forth between drug and him as the giver of my experience, forced into lockstep with the higher order of the universe. No longer free to be a messy bundle of neurons, they were lining up in perfect rows, marching along like soldiers. Opening my eyes again, I began to feel afraid, as I saw this process intensifying and accelerating far beyond my ability to keep up mentally. The details of my surroundings became increasingly hard to discern. They kept organizing into each other and forming larger and larger aggregate clusters of shape and color. The world was going from full color, live-action detail to the level of detail from a scene in The Simpsons. I was physically frozen in place, unable to understand what was happening. Simultaneously, the amber LED display on my black stereo receiver, which sits atop my TV and happened to be my direct line of sight during this open-eyed trance, became unreadable. Not blurry, no. If anything, it became crystal clear, as if scales had fallen from my eyes. Rather, it was now in an alien language, a twisted hieroglyph of triangles and arcane script. This text was flowing and changing and flipping, like the digits on a scoreboard, to reveal new text underneath. This was all incredibly profound, and I felt intensely honoured and privileged to experience it. And yet, it kept getting stronger and stronger. I was being erased by this sea of alien organisation washing over the universe, and I would soon cease to exist as a separate entity. My first instinct was to fight against this, thrashing my head to the side, but I was commanded by him to submit, and I could not refuse. He wanted me to keep looking, open myself, and to be part of him, frozen in time and place for all of eternity. I opened my eyes again and tried to calm myself, telling myself I would not die. Somewhere, deep, deep in the back of my mind, I knew I had taken a drug and that this was not real. But this was so far from mattering that it really didn't count as knowledge. But instead, I told myself, as long as I can still hear the music, I'm still alive. I'm still in this world. Time has not stopped. I'm not frozen yet. So I grasped desperately at the music like a drowning man with a life preserver. Yeah man, free up, yeah man. The singer sounded miles away and was getting further away every second. And then his voice, the music, all the sound in my environment began cutting in and out like a bad cell phone connection, the gaps between sounds getting longer and longer. Yeah man, yeah man, yeah. Total silence. There was no sound, no sensory input of any kind from outside my body, except a cartoon sketch of my living room, expunged of all detail, brightly lit by an otherworldly light, around which my eyes looked wildly. The last bits of language in my view, the digits on the stereo receiver, winked out one by one. That is, the black box itself remained completely lucid and clear. Someone had just erased all the text from it, one letter at a time, just as the sound was cutting out one syllable at a time, closing in on me in a narrowing spiral of deafness, muteness, and, essentially, blindness. Size and shape were still allowed to me to perceive visually, but language and detail were not. I was alone with him, in glassy, frozen silence for eternity. All I had to cling on to was the deafening sound of my own frantic breathing, a desperate sucking for life in a vacuum, a bit like the astronauts in their spacesuits in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then, the singer and his musicians began to break through the silence, singing to me from eons away, "Free up, stand up, carry on, you got to stand." Like grass and rocks emerging from beneath melting snow, the visual details of the room began to well up from behind the pristine surface of his frozen universe. Hallelujah. The exhilaration of this moment was like nothing I have ever experienced on any drug, anywhere. It was to touch God, if you will. I had come through his realm and returned to my own, reborn with more knowledge and wisdom than I had ever thought I could contain. The receiver on top of the TV had come to life. Not until later did I read about other people's DMT trips that have also contained mechanical elves, which this certainly was. It was an emissary from him, and it tipped its hat to me and grinned, the way wacky cartoon cars grin with their front grills as mouths. It started to jump up and down on its little steel legs in time to the music, baring its teeth in a ferocious smile at me and nodding, "Yes, yes, this is real, my friend. Oh, yes, 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 this is real, my friend. This is actually happening. You've been there where so few of us have been allowed to go. Can you believe it? Can you believe it, man? Oh, man, now it's time to celebrate, boy." I was back. I was back. My God. I hugged myself tighter than ever, rocking back and forth, laughing as loud as I could. By now, the visuals, well, they were truly insane, having completely broken out of their previously frozen hierarchy of organization. I was blinded by swirling masses of purple and yellow and chains of stars. By the clock, several minutes went by, and I must have essentially blacked out because, well, I don't remember much of it. This part of the trip was indistinguishable to me from a hard acid trip, just spacing out in a sea of visions and thought loops. At one point, I sat up in the chair and a second flash hit me. A kind of aftershock that was a pale echo of the original flash. This one had much more of a noticeable body load, with hypertension, and for a second I was afraid, thinking, "Oh my God, I cannot handle another trip right now, please, for God's sake, I'll actually have a heart attack." But I took a deep breath, and it passed quickly enough. 2 hours and 30 to 4 hours. I came down during this period. The rest of the evening was pretty scattered. I wandered around the apartment laughing and saying stupid stuff like, "Oh my God," and "damn," and "holy shit," and feeling incredibly grateful and excited to have made contact with the higher power behind DMT. Although I am not a religious person, I find it impossible not to have some tiny part of me say, "You met God that night, you know." It was pretty much impossible to tell when the DMT trailed off since the DPT was still in effect. At some point, after much back and forth, I decided to snort the remaining 50 milligrams of DPT, and I finished off another box of nitrous bulbs. But this was pretty much a waste of material. Nothing else could be in the least memorable in the hours following the DMT voyage. As an aside, when I thought about it later, I realised the visuals from DMT are extremely reminiscent of Incan and Mayan architecture, ziggurats, etc. The whole concept of reality organising into a geometrical regularity that ascends upward to God suddenly made a huge amount of sense to me after this experience. Of course, there were ayahuasca drinkers who experienced the same effect centuries ago and attributed it to God, had it replicated in their religious artifacts and architecture. Anyway, in terms of side effects, I did have a bit of a headache for a while, like I always get after smoking 5-MeO DMT, and DPT, well, that gave me some intestinal problems. But you know what, other than that though, this was a clean trip. In the days afterward, I felt like I had finally experienced what psychedelic trips are really all about. I was unsure how satisfied I would ever be again with average trips. What I went through right here, well, this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And if I happened to be so fortunate as to have a second chance to delve this deep into DMT, well, I will certainly not be passing it up.
world is an envelope. A mushrooms and ketamine trip report by a golden teacher. Posted to earwood.org November 13th, 2010. The use of psychedelics for me is a spiritual undertaking done mostly in the outdoors while camping. My friends and I often camp on an island upriver from where we live. This experience follows a recent camping trip there. A few hours before sunset, a friend of mine and I took about a gram of mushrooms. We went swimming with the others, and it was an absolutely beautiful summer evening, and we were all in good spirits. By the time we were back on shore, my friend and I were beginning to feel the mushrooms. We felt pleasantly lifted in mind. We both agreed that colours were particularly sharper. We had not felt any anxiety of coming up, however we are both experienced mushroom users. We decided to eat about 0.5 grams more each. Around dusk, we were playing with hula hoops and poi. Someone had set up a tightrope, which my friend was avidly trying to master. I ate about another 0.5 grams. I had a huge amount of energy. I was bouncing between hula hooping, spinning poi, and chatting with others. Anytime I looked at the sky, it turned into a huge watercolour painting, something like Monet would have done. I felt intensely connected to the campsite ground and the island itself as a sacred place. This is where we come to be real, I concluded. Later, I was hanging out round the fire, sitting on an inflatable mattress with a few others who were drinking. I ended up having a very intense discussion about life, the universe, and everything with an acquaintance of mine. I felt as if it was the first time we'd really met. I always felt shy around him for some reason, although I'm not a shy person. We talked for about 2 hours straight, me eating another gram of mushrooms in between. At one point he blew my mind, as one might call it. I had an intense realisation about my family life and how to overcome some certain problems I have with my sister, which I intend on applying in the future. We discussed the ills of society, particularly the fakeness we saw as being an endemic problem with all people. We concluded that only once we shed this disguise could we truly be free. At this point, another friend called me over to where he and a few others were sitting. They were doing lines of ketamine. I've never tried ketamine before, but most of the people present camping were experienced users and suggested that if I felt up to it, I should give it a try. Since I felt in an excellent and relatively clear state of mind, I decided that I would be able to handle something new. I specified that I didn't want too much, but I wanted enough to feel the effects, after which I would decide if I wanted more. I was served a line, and after snorting it, I sat back down on the air mattress. Within a few minutes, I began to feel like I was rocking on a ship. It became more difficult to express myself in a way that made any sense. I giggled almost non-stop as I was coming up. The air mattress felt like it was hovering above the grass. I actually felt a little overwhelmed, so I remained lying down. Shadows became particularly pronounced. The difference between things that were light in colour and dark in colour was readily apparent as black against white. At one point, I could only see in black and white. This wasn't scary as much as it was very disorienting. After a while, I'd come down and felt the mushrooms again. I took a bit of a break to process what had just happened. I concluded that it was interesting and I would like to try it again, perhaps while standing or doing something other than lying down. I was served a line slightly larger than before. Some others were hula hooping and spinning poi in a little clearing close to the campfire, so I decided to join them. At first, I just watched. The poi was glow in the dark and was creating fantastic traces of circular light. I don't usually get traces with mushrooms, unless I've taken over 4 grams at once, so I attributed it to the ketamine. I attempted to hula hoop, I can do some tricks, but quickly found out that almost all coordination had been lost. After putting down the hula hoop, I felt very dizzy and had to stand still for a few minutes. I tried to venture back to the fire, but found that I couldn't even sit by it. It was far too bright to even be close to, and I had a vague idea that an angel had landed there, which was the reason I couldn't look at the fire. I travelled back to the clearing where people were still spinning poi, but I ended up getting stuck in an envelope. The ground felt as if it was very slanted downward and then very slanted upward, although it was actually completely flat, creating a V-shaped valley in the middle of the clearing and ultimately divided the entire island in this way. The further in either direction I went, the more I climbed,
so it felt like I was stuck in the bottom of an envelope. I attempted to explain this to a friend in the clearing, but she didn't understand, and I felt very frustrated because I wasn't able to communicate whatsoever. I climbed up the side of this envelope back to the fire, which didn't appear as bright as before. Everything was still slanting one way or the other. I felt very disoriented and aggravated because I just couldn't get comfortable. I sat cross-legged by the fireside, spouting nonsense and throwing fistfuls of grass at the fire. I felt a bit better sitting down, but felt so full of energy I didn't know what to do with myself. My best friend was sitting beside me. I can't wait to not be high on ketamine anymore. I told her this and said, because I can't do anything. If I do, I'll get stuck in this envelope forever. She laughed and asked if I was feeling alright. I said that I was feeling great, but I couldn't get rid of any of the energy I had because I was just too immobile. We relaxed by the fire while poking it with sticks. Faces and shapes were coming out of the embers and logs. We made up stories about the faces and tried to make them smile or change expression by poking them with our sticks. This was probably the most intense of the open-eyed hallucinations that I had that night. About half an hour later, I had come down from the ketamine and was once again in the familiar embrace of mushrooms. I believe that the mixture of mushrooms and ketamine led to the frustration that I experienced. I felt that the energy that mushrooms gives me was competing with the disorientation that ketamine apparently has, creating a type of insanity or level of frustration, not necessarily bad, similar to being disoriented on LSD, with which I am also experienced. Sitting down and focusing on something that I could play with in my hands, like poking the fire with a stick, ended up solving this problem. What am I? A Mushrooms and Ketamine Trip Report by Leonie. Posted to early.org February 26, 2018. After 6 years listening to extreme metal, me and my friends discovered the world of Goa, Psytrance, and of course, the drugs that goes with the scene. So, we decided to go to the Full Moon Festival in Germany. The first day, I made a good deal and bought a lot of LSD, but I didn't feel the need to trip, so I gave some to my friends and sold the rest. I took some MDMA, but for some reason my body rejected it. Same story with ecstasy a day later. But the festival was so good that it didn't matter, and I actually gave up on the drugs. Until the last night, a friend offered me mushrooms because he didn't want to trip alone. I took some of his shrooms because I felt good enough to trip. It must have been 1/3 of the portion, but I don't know what kind of shrooms it was. I lost the guy out of sight and I started to enjoy the festival more and more. Everything was so beautiful, and I loved everything I saw. 1200 Mics was playing, and as I was one with the music, I realised only I understood it. I started laughing and laughing and I couldn't stop it. I know, I thought, damn, I must look like some kind of maniac right now. But it didn't matter, and I wanted this feeling to last forever. It was a pretty weird feeling. It didn't feel like I took shrooms at all. I could still dance and talk to people, when usually I sit in a corner enjoying my own world where no one can reach me. It felt like MDMA, but I started to see visuals, which I'd never seen before on shrooms. The faces of the people started to change and everybody was laughing, and all I could do was laugh with them. Later, I ran into a guy which I'd met on the festival before. I knew he had DMT, and I asked if he still had that, because I wanted to please my friends with it. He said he didn't have it, but he did have some ketamine. He asked me if I wanted that. And at that point I made a mistake by thinking ketamine was amphetamine. It all sounded the same to me, and I couldn't think straight. Everything was good, nothing was bad. I could use some amphetamines because I wanted the feeling to last forever. So we walked to his car, and when we walked back, he asked me how my stomach was feeling. I know, I thought, what a strange question. Why would my stomach feel strange after some speed? I said that I'd see the guy back on the dance floor, and I proceeded to walk towards a tent of some super cool people. I gave them back a blanket that I borrowed from them, and I asked them to come dancing. I wanted to walk away, and then I crashed down. I started to realise what was running in my blood, and I started to lose my body. I couldn't feel if I was sitting or lying. I couldn't even imagine that I ever had a body. Some special force picked me up and made me float to another world. I can't describe what those worlds were looking like. It was just magical. Sometimes I felt like God. I could see the whole world, the festival, my friends at home, and I could control everything. I was one with the world, and everything was so clear. Everything made sense. I couldn't believe that there are people out there bullshitting about what shoes to wear or in what religion one should believe. I didn't even have a body, and even that didn't matter. There were also moments that I got scared and realised that it was all a dream. There were moments that I didn't know if I was still alive. I heard myself saying, "Who am I?" And even more importantly, what am I? I tried to get up, or at least move, but I felt like a robot without power. I know some guy covered me with a blanket, but I didn't feel it. I wanted to thank him, but I couldn't say it. I was also thankful to these people around me that I hardly knew. I was thankful that they just left me alone, and that they didn't ask me any annoying questions. I caught myself touching my head to see if it was actually still there. I also caught myself throwing up. But genuinely nothing was the matter. It still all felt very good. Then I came to a point that I saw myself sitting in front of the tent, and I realised that I did have a body, that I was human, that I could go back if I wanted. After a while I woke up, and the amazing people around me didn't ask me a thing. They just let me do my story. I couldn't talk. I had the same feeling as before. All I could do was laugh and laugh. The next morning, I woke up alone in the tent or shop, and I left a note to thank these guys. When I walked away, I realised what had happened to me that night. I think even if I would have planned the ketamine, it would have scared the shit out of me. I didn't know ketamine could give me a near-death experience. It turned my world upside down and inside out, and it's all in my head. I didn't know ketamine could be so brutal. The mushrooms saved me that night. They just made me enjoy the whole trip. Otherwise, it would have been the worst trip of my life.